The interview was over. Daniel Hayes knew it the moment the lead executive glanced at his resume and then looked away. But as he stood to leave, his eyes caught the projection screen behind them, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The numbers were wrong, catastrophically wrong, and in 72 hours, this company was going to lose everything. Before we dive into Daniel's story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated? Ever walked into a room where no one believed you belonged? Drop a comment below with the city you're watching from, and hit that like button so I know this story is reaching you. Now let's see how far determination can take a man who refuses to stay invisible. The fluorescent lights in the reception area of Sterling Analytics felt colder than they should have. Daniel Hayes sat in one of the sleek leather chairs, his worn suit jacket pulled tight across his shoulders, and watched the glass elevator doors open and close with mechanical precision. Every person who stepped out looked like they belonged. Tailored clothing, confident strides, designer briefcases that probably cost more than his monthly rent. He didn't belong here. He knew that. But he needed this job more than he'd needed anything in years. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out carefully, mindful of the cracks spreading across the screen like a spider's web. A text from his daughter's school lit up the display. Reminder, field trip payment due Friday. $45. $45. Such a small amount. Such an impossible mountain. He typed back quickly. Got it. Thanks. The lie tasted bitter even through a text message. Mr. Hayes? A young woman in a crisp white blouse appeared beside him, tablet in hand. They're ready for you now. Conference room B, 14th floor. Thank you. Daniel stood, smoothing down his tie. It was the same tie he'd worn to his college graduation 7 years ago, back when he still thought finishing his degree was just a matter of time. Back before Sophie was born. Back before everything became about survival instead of dreams. The elevator ride felt like ascending into another world. Through the glass walls, he watched the city spread out below, downtown traffic moving like blood through veins, construction cranes dotting the skyline, people living lives that didn't include counting coins for school field trips. The doors opened on 14. Conference room B was exactly what he'd expected. A long mahogany table, ergonomic chairs that probably adjusted 17 different ways, and a wall of windows overlooking the financial district. 3 people sat waiting, their expressions professionally neutral in that way that meant they'd already made their decisions. Mr. Hayes, please, have a seat. The woman in the center gestured to the chair across from them. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, expensive watch. The nameplate in front of her read Catherine Voss, senior partner. To her left sat a younger man, maybe 30, with the kind of haircut that required maintenance. Jonathan Pierce, analytics director. On her right, an older gentleman with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. Robert Chen, chief operations officer. Daniel sat. The leather was cold through his slacks. Thank you for coming in today, Catherine began, her tone pleasant but distant. We've reviewed your application materials. Your freelance portfolio shows some interesting work. Interesting, Jonathan echoed, leaning back in his chair. His tone made the word sound like an insult wrapped in politeness. Though I notice you didn't complete your degree at Northwestern. No, sir. Daniel kept his voice steady. Family circumstances required me to leave school in my final semester. I've continued my education independently through online courses and practical application. Jonathan smiled slightly. Freelance projects for small businesses, correct? Nothing at enterprise scale? That's correct, though I've worked extensively with. The position we're filling requires someone who can handle datasets involving millions of records, Catherine interrupted gently. Complex systems architecture, direct client interaction at the executive level. Our clients expect a certain pedigree. There it was. The word hung in the air like smoke. Pedigree. Daniel had known this was coming. He'd known it the moment he'd walked through the lobby and seen the wall of framed diplomas from Harvard, Stanford, MIT. He'd known it when he'd typed his resume, staring at that incomplete degree like a scar that never healed. But he'd come anyway, because hope was cheaper than surrender. I understand your concern, Daniel said carefully. My background isn't traditional, but I'd like to think my work speaks for itself. The portfolio includes a predictive model I built for a regional retailer that increased their inventory efficiency by 38%. I designed that system from the ground up, handling over 2 million transaction records. 2 million. Jonathan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Our smallest client processes 50 million monthly interactions. With all due respect, Mr. Hayes, there's a significant difference between boutique consulting and what we do here. Robert Chen, who'd been silent until now, shifted in his seat. Your references were quite strong, he offered, his voice more measured than Jonathan's. Professor Martinez from Northwestern spoke very highly of your analytical capabilities. Professor Martinez has been very generous with his time, Daniel replied. He's continued to mentor me even after I had to leave the program. That's commendable. Catherine's expression softened fractionally. And I can see from your work that you have raw talent. But Mr. Hayes, this firm operates at a level that requires not just skill, but the kind of comprehensive theoretical foundation that comes from completing a rigorous academic program. Our clients are Fortune 500 companies. They expect... The door burst open. A woman in her 30s rushed in, her face flushed, phone clutched in one hand. Catherine, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. Hyperion Digital just called. The quarterly report we submitted yesterday. They're threatening to pull the entire contract. Catherine's professional composure cracked. What? That's impossible. Jonathan reviewed those numbers personally. They're saying the user engagement metrics don't match their internal data. Not even close. The woman's voice was tight with panic. They think we falsified the analysis. Marcus is on the phone with their CEO right now, and it's not going well. They're talking lawsuit. The color drained from Jonathan's face. That's insane. I built that model myself, triple-checked every calculation. They're saying we reported 83% user retention when their actual active user rate is barely 40%. They've been making strategic decisions based on our numbers, and now everything's falling apart. Robert stood abruptly. Where's Marcus now? Executive conference room. He needs you all up there immediately. The CEO is furious. Catherine rose, her movements sharp. Mr. Hayes, I apologize, but we need to cut this short. She paused, glancing at Jonathan and Robert. We'll be in touch regarding next steps. The dismissal was clear. Daniel stood as well, nodding professionally, even as disappointment settled into his chest like a stone. Of course. Thank you for your time. They were already moving toward the door, voices low and urgent. Daniel gathered his folder, his carefully prepared portfolio that no one had looked at beyond the first page, and turned to leave. Through the glass wall of the conference room, he could see into another space down the hall. The executive conference room, probably. A large projection screen was visible, and even from this distance, Daniel could see numbers, charts, a dashboard interface he recognized immediately. His steps slowed. Something about those numbers felt wrong. Even from here, even at this angle, something in the visual pattern triggered a warning in his mind. It was the same instinct that had caught errors in his freelance work, the same pattern recognition that Professor Martinez had called his gift for seeing what others miss. He should leave. They'd made their decision. He had Sophie's daycare pickup in an hour, and the bus ride across town took 45 minutes. He should walk out with whatever dignity he had left and start applying to the next round of jobs that would probably also reject him. Instead, Daniel found himself walking toward the executive conference room. The voices inside were raised, angry. Through the glass, he could see Catherine, Jonathan, and Robert gathered around a long table with several other executives. A man with steel-gray hair, Marcus probably, the managing partner whose name was on the company letterhead, stood near the projection screen, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing sharply. Daniel stopped just outside the door. On the screen, the dashboard showed exactly what he'd glimpsed from the conference room. User engagement metrics for something called Hyperion Digital. Bar charts showing retention rates. Line graphs tracking monthly active users. Pie charts breaking down demographic segments. And there, in the data structure underlying the visualizations, was the problem. His mind processed it automatically, the way some people could hear a wrong note in a symphony. The retention calculation was measuring total registered accounts against monthly active users, but it wasn't filtering for dormant accounts. Every user who'd ever created an account was being counted as part of the retention pool, even if they hadn't logged in for months or years. The actual active user percentage was being mathematically inflated by dead weight. It was such a basic error that it seemed impossible. But there it was, right in the formula structure visible in the SQL query displayed in the corner of one of the dashboard panels. Daniel's hand moved to the door handle before he consciously decided to touch it. The conference room fell silent as he stepped inside. Every face turned toward him, confusion, irritation, and in Jonathan's case, outright hostility. "Excuse me?" Marcus lowered his phone slightly. "Who are you?" "Daniel Hayes, sir. I was just interviewed for the analytics position. I apologize for interrupting, but I think I see the problem with your Hyperion digital report." Jonathan's face flushed red. "That's completely inappropriate. Security... Wait." Robert Chen held up a hand, his eyes sharp behind his reading glasses. "What do you mean, you see the problem?" Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs, but his voice stayed level. "Your retention calculation. It's measuring total registered users against monthly active users, but it's not accounting for dormant accounts. You're treating every account that was ever created as part of your current user base, even if they haven't logged in for 6 months or longer." The room went very still. Catherine moved toward the screen, her eyes scanning the displayed formulas. "Show me." Daniel approached the screen, pointing to the SQL query, visible in one panel. "Here. The select statement is pulling from the entire users table with a left join to monthly underscore activity, but there's no where clause filtering by last underscore login underscore date. So an account created 2 years ago that's never been used since registration day is being counted the same as an account that logged in yesterday." Jonathan pushed forward. "That's ridiculous. I built that query myself." He stopped, staring at the screen. The color drained from his face. "Oh my God," Catherine whispered. "He's right. We've been measuring ghost accounts as active users." Marcus set his phone down slowly on the table. "How long has this model been running?" 6 months, Robert said quietly. "We've been reporting to Hyperion for 6 months based on this calculation. And they've been making strategic decisions based on our numbers." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Business expansion, marketing spend, investor presentations, all based on user engagement numbers that were fundamentally wrong. The implications settled over the room like fallout. "Their actual retention rate isn't 83%, Daniel said quietly. "Based on what I can see in this dataset preview, it's probably closer to 40%, maybe less." Jesus Christ. Jonathan sank into a chair. "They're going to sue us into the ground." "Can we fix it?" Catherine's voice was razor-sharp, focused. "Can we rebuild the model correctly and show them what the real numbers are?" "Yes," Daniel answered before anyone else could speak. "But you'll need to go deeper than just fixing the retention formula. If this error is in the retention calculation, it's probably affecting other metrics too. User lifetime value, churn prediction, engagement scoring, all of those models likely have similar structural problems." Marcus studied Daniel with new intensity. How long would it take to audit the entire analytics framework? For one person, working alone? Daniel calculated quickly. 72 hours minimum. Maybe more depending on how many interdependent models there are. "We don't have 72 hours, Jonathan said bitterly. "Hyperion wants answers by end of day Friday. That's 3 days from now, and they want a complete explanation plus a corrected analysis." "Then you need to decide right now what matters more," Daniel said. "Speed or accuracy. You can throw together a surface-level fix to make Friday's deadline, or you can do this properly and deliver something that actually solves the underlying problem. The first option might save the contract short-term. The second option might save your reputation long-term." Catherine looked at Marcus. Robert looked at Catherine. The weight of a multi-million-dollar decision hung in the air between them. Marcus picked up his phone again. "I'm going to tell Hyperion's CEO that we've identified the source of the discrepancy and we're implementing a complete model rebuild. I'll ask for a 4-day extension." He paused, looking directly at Daniel. "And I'm going to tell him that our best analytics specialist is personally overseeing the correction." "Marcus," Jonathan started. Not another word. Marcus's voice could have cut glass. "You built a model that's about to cost this firm everything we've spent 15 years building. I don't want to hear your voice right now." He turned back to Daniel. Can you do this? Really do this? Because if you tell me yes and you can't deliver, we're finished. The firm, the client relationship, everything. But if you can actually pull this off, I'll personally hand you whatever position you want in this company. Daniel thought of Sophie, of the field trip payment he couldn't afford, of 7 years of jobs that never quite materialized, opportunities that never quite opened, doors that closed before he could get his foot inside, of every time someone had looked at his resume and seen what was missing instead of what was there. Give me access to the complete data set, he said. All of Hyperion's user data, transaction records, system logs, everything you have, and I'll need a workspace with no interruptions. Done, Marcus nodded to Catherine. Set him up in the secure analytics lab. Full database access, whatever resources he needs. You can't be serious, Jonathan said. He's not even an employee. He doesn't have clearance. He has 72 hours to save our reputation, Marcus cut him off. That's all the clearance he needs. Catherine, drop an emergency contractor agreement. Mr. Hayes, what's your rate? Daniel's mind went blank for a second. He'd never had leverage before, never been in a position to name a price. $3,000, he heard himself say. It was more than he usually made in 2 months of freelance work. Per day? Marcus said flatly. $9,000 for 3 days' work, plus a $50,000 completion bonus if you deliver a model that satisfies Hyperion's audit team. And if this works out, we'll talk about permanent employment at a salary that reflects your actual value, not your resume. $50,000. The number was incomprehensible. That was a year's worth of struggling, a year's worth of counting pennies, a year's worth of telling Sophie they couldn't afford things other kids had. Deal, Daniel said. 20 minutes later, he was sitting in a small windowless room 3 floors below ground level, staring at 4 massive monitors displaying more data than he'd ever accessed in his life. The secure analytics lab was designed for the firm's most sensitive client work: biometric door locks, no external network access, encrypted storage systems. Catherine had left him with a key card, a company laptop configured with database credentials, and a simple instruction: save us. Now she was gone, and Daniel was alone with 53 million user records, 6 months of transaction logs, and the crushing weight of knowing that dozens of jobs depended on what he could accomplish in the next 72 hours. He pulled out his phone, still allowed for personal use, just no data transfer, and texted his neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Emergency work project. Can you pick up Sophie from daycare this week? I'll pay you back. Her response came quickly. Of course, honey. Don't worry about payment. You just do what you need to do. Daniel set the phone aside and turned to the screens. The data was already loaded, waiting. Millions of rows of information, each one representing a person who'd interacted with Hyperion Digital's platform. Real people making real decisions, whose behavior had been completely misunderstood because someone had built a model on a flawed foundation. He cracked his knuckles and opened the first query window. Okay, he muttered to the empty room. Let's see what you're really made of. The first step was validation. Before he could fix anything, he needed to understand the full scope of the damage. Daniel started writing queries, pulling sample data sets, comparing the reported metrics against what the raw data actually showed. Retention rate, reported at 83%. Actual active user rate closer to 37%. User lifetime value, inflated by approximately 180% due to counting dormant accounts as potential future revenue. Engagement scoring, completely meaningless because the baseline calculation treated a single login from 2 years ago the same as daily active use. It was worse than he'd thought. The entire analytics framework was built on sand. By midnight, Daniel had filled a physical notebook with schema diagrams and calculation flows. His eyes burned from staring at screens and his back ached from sitting in the same position for hours. But the problem was taking shape in his mind like a sculpture emerging from marble. The core issue wasn't just the retention formula, it was the entire philosophical approach to measuring user value. Hyperion Digital was a subscription-based platform. Users paid monthly for access to premium features. The analytics model treated every subscription that had ever been created as part of the current user base, regardless of whether those subscriptions were still active. It was like a gym counting everyone who'd ever signed up for a membership, even the ones who'd canceled after a month and never came back. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. Mrs. Chen made me soup dumplings. Are you working late? He smiled despite his exhaustion. Yes, sweetie. Big project. I'll call you tomorrow to say goodnight. Love you. Love you too, Daddy. He set the phone down and rubbed his eyes. The coffee he'd gotten from the break room upstairs had gone cold hours ago, but he drank it anyway. Caffeine was caffeine. By 2 in the morning, he'd mapped out the complete architecture of a new model. Instead of measuring total registered accounts, it would segment users by actual behavior, active subscribers, churned users, at-risk accounts, dormant accounts with reactivation potential, and completely inactive legacy records. Each segment would have its own metrics and predictive indicators. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious for a 72-hour deadline, but it was right. And if he was going to do this, he was going to do it right. Daniel started coding. The work consumed him completely. Time became meaningless in the windowless lab. He worked until his hands cramped, took 10-minute breaks to walk the hallway and force blood back into his legs, then returned to the screens. He survived on vending machine coffee and the sandwiches that mysteriously appeared outside the lab door every few hours, courtesy of Catherine's assistant. The model began to take shape. User segmentation algorithms, churn prediction models using logistic regression, engagement scoring based on recency, frequency, and monetary value, lifetime value calculations that accounted for actual retention patterns, not fantasy metrics. 30 hours in, Daniel hit a wall. The reactivation prediction model wasn't working. He was trying to identify which dormant users were most likely to return to the platform based on their historical behavior, but the accuracy rates were terrible, barely better than random guessing. He stared at the code until the words blurred together. His mind felt like static. Maybe Jonathan was right. Maybe he was out of his depth. Maybe there was a reason people with complete degrees from prestigious schools got jobs like this, while people like him scraped by on freelance work. His phone buzzed. A voicemail from Sophie, left hours ago when he'd been too deep in code to notice. Hi, Daddy. Mrs. Chen says you're doing something really important for work. I drew you a picture of us at the park. I hope your work goes good. I miss you. Love you. Daniel closed his eyes and listened to her voice again, and then once more. When he opened his eyes, he saw the problem. He'd been treating reactivation as a function of past engagement patterns. But what if the key variable wasn't what users had done before they left? It was why they'd left in the first place. If he could identify the triggers that caused users to churn, he could predict which of those triggers were temporary versus permanent. Daniel dove back into the data, this time looking at the sequences of events leading up to account deactivation. Price changes, feature updates, customer service interactions, platform performance issues. Patterns emerged. Users who churned after a price increase but had high previous engagement showed a 34% reactivation rate when offered promotional pricing. Users who left after technical problems rarely returned unless there was direct outreach about fixes. Users who simply stopped using the platform with no clear trigger almost never came back. He rebuilt the reactivation model using trigger categorization. The accuracy jumped to 71%. Yes, Daniel breathed. Yes. There you are. 48 hours in, Catherine appeared at the lab door with a tablet and 2 cups of actual good coffee. How's it going? She asked, handing him one of the cups. Getting there. Daniel accepted the coffee gratefully. The core framework is solid. I'm finishing the predictive models now, then I'll need to validate everything against test datasets. Catherine sat down in the chair beside him. Marcus got Hyperion to agree to a presentation on Friday at noon. Their entire executive team will be there, plus their head of analytics and their legal counsel. Legal counsel? They're still deciding whether to sue us. Catherine's expression was grim. This presentation needs to do more than just fix the numbers, Daniel. It needs to prove that we know what we're doing, that we can be trusted. No pressure, then. You're handling more pressure than anyone should have to. Catherine looked at the screens, at the complex queries and visualization dashboards Daniel had built. I owe you an apology. When you walked into that interview, I'd already decided you weren't qualified. I looked at your resume and saw what was missing instead of what was there. You're not the first, Daniel said quietly. That doesn't make it right. She paused. Marcus asked me to draw up a formal employment offer for Yisu. Senior Analytics Specialist, 120,000 base salary plus performance bonuses. Full benefits, equity stake in the firm. It's yours if you want it, regardless of how Friday goes. Daniel nearly dropped his coffee. 120,000? You're about to save our most important client relationship. You identified a critical error in less than 30 seconds that our entire analytics team missed for 6 months. And from what I can see on these screens, you're building something that's legitimately innovative. Catherine smiled slightly. We'd be idiots not to hire you. We were idiots not to hire you the first time. I haven't delivered yet, Daniel said. Friday could still go wrong. Then we'll deal with it together, as colleagues. Catherine stood. There's a cot in the storage room down the hall. Get some sleep, Daniel. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. After she left, Daniel sat in the quiet lab and let himself feel it. The exhaustion, the fear, the fragile, terrifying hope that maybe, finally, something was going to work out. He thought about calling Sophie, but it was 3 a.m. Instead, he sent a text. I love you, sweetheart. Dream about the park. Then he forced himself to walk down to the storage room and lie down on the uncomfortable cot. His mind spun with SQL queries and statistical models, but eventually, exhaustion pulled him under. He woke 4 hours later to his phone alarm and returned to the lab. 60 hours in, the model was complete. Daniel ran it against the full Hyperion dataset and watched the numbers populate. Real retention rates, accurate lifetime value predictions, user segments that actually reflected behavior patterns, churn risk scores that could guide intervention strategies. It was beautiful, clean, true. Now came the hard part, proving it to people who had every reason not to trust Sterling Analytics. Daniel spent the next 12 hours building the presentation. Not just slides with charts, that wouldn't be enough. He built an interactive dashboard that would let Hyperion's team explore their own data in real time, verify every calculation, drill down into any metric they questioned. He documented every assumption, every formula, every data source. He created a technical appendix that explained the methodology in detail for their analytics team to review. He prepared answers to every question he could anticipate. By Thursday evening, 70 hours into his deadline, Daniel had something he could defend. Catherine came by the lab one final time. Ready? As ready as I'll ever be. Marcus scheduled the presentation for noon tomorrow. We'll have about 2 hours with them. Their CEO will be there, Victoria Hyperion herself. She's the granddaughter of the company founder, and from what I hear, she's not interested in excuses. Good, Daniel said. I'm not planning to make any. That night, he finally went home. The apartment was quiet. Sophie was asleep at Mrs. Chen's place, where she'd been staying all week. Daniel stood in the empty living room, looking at the picture she'd drawn stuck to the refrigerator. 2 stick figures in a park, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. He took a shower that felt like washing off 3 days of pressure, put on clean clothes, and set his alarm for 6 a.m. Tomorrow would determine everything. Friday morning, Daniel arrived at Sterling Analytics at 10 a.m. The presentation was loaded and tested. His notes were organized. The interactive dashboard was running smoothly. Marcus found him in the executive conference room, adjusting the projection settings. Hell of a week, Marcus said. Yes, sir. Catherine told me about the model. She said it's the most sophisticated user analytics framework she's seen in 15 years in this industry. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. Marcus studied him for a moment. You didn't have to do this, you know. You could have walked out of that interview and never looked back. Instead, you saved our reputation. He extended his hand. Thank you. Daniel shook it. The grip was firm, respectful, equal. The team from Hyperion will be here in an hour, Marcus continued. We'll have Catherine, Robert, and myself in the room along with you. Jonathan has been reassigned to other projects. Understood. One more thing. Marcus pulled an envelope from his jacket. Your contractor payment. $9,000 for 3 days' work. The completion bonus will be processed after today's presentation, assuming we don't get sued into bankruptcy. Daniel took the envelope, feeling the weight of the check inside. More money than he'd held in his hands in years. Make them believers, Marcus said. That's all I'm asking. At 11:45, the Hyperion digital team arrived. Victoria Hyperion was exactly as imposing as her reputation suggested. Mid-50s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She was accompanied by her chief analytics officer, a man named David Park, their chief operating officer, and two lawyers who looked like they'd come prepared for battle. The introductions were brief and professional. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. "Let's get started," Victoria said, taking her seat at the head of the table. "We're here because your firm has been providing us with analytics that were fundamentally incorrect for 6 months. We made business decisions based on your data. Strategic decisions. We expanded into markets that we now realize we weren't ready for. We increased marketing spend based on engagement rates that were fiction. So before we talk about whether we're going to sue you, I want to understand exactly how this happened and why we should ever trust anything you tell us again." Daniel stepped to the front of the room. His hands were steady. His voice was clear. "Ms. Hyperion, the error in the original model came from a fundamental misunderstanding of user behavior patterns," he began. "The system was measuring account creation as equivalent to user engagement, which inflated retention metrics by treating dormant accounts as active users. I can show you exactly where that calculation went wrong, and more importantly, I can show you what your actual user base looks like when measured correctly." He brought up the first dashboard. "This is your real retention rate over the past 6 months, not 83%, 37%. I know that number is painful to see, but it's true, and truth is the only foundation you can build strategy on." David Park leaned forward, studying the screen. "How did you calculate this?" "By segmenting users based on actual login behavior and subscription status, not just account existence." Daniel walked them through the methodology step by step, showing the query logic, the data sources, the validation checks. Victoria's expression remained hard. "So we've been operating on completely false assumptions." "Yes, but those false assumptions also mean there's significant untapped potential in your actual user base that the previous model couldn't identify." Daniel switched to the next dashboard. "Here's what we discovered when we analyzed your churned users. 34% of accounts that canceled in the past year show high reactivation potential based on their trigger patterns. They didn't leave because they didn't like your platform. They left because of temporary friction points like price sensitivity or technical issues." He showed them the reactivation model, the engagement scoring system, the lifetime value predictions based on real behavior. "This is what your business actually looks like," Daniel continued. "Not the fantasy version that made everyone feel good, but the real version that shows you where the opportunities are. You have approximately 2 million truly active users, another 1.3 million at-risk accounts that need intervention in the next 60 days to prevent churn, and 750,000 high-potential dormant accounts that could be reactivated with targeted campaigns." David Park was taking notes now, his initial skepticism shifting to intense focus. "The interactive dashboard I've built lets you drill down into any of these segments in real time," Daniel said, switching to the live interface. "You can filter by demographic, by acquisition channel, by feature usage, by any variable you need. All of it is built on accurate data and validated calculations." For the next hour, they tested the model. David threw complex queries at it, asked for cross-tabulated analyses, demanded to see the underlying SQL. Daniel answered every question, demonstrated every calculation, showed every assumption. Victoria said very little, but her eyes never left the screens. Finally, David sat back. "This is extraordinary work," he said quietly. "The segmentation framework alone is more sophisticated than what we're running internally. How long did this take you to build?" 72 hours, Catherine answered. "From initial concept to full deployment." One of the lawyers whispered something to Victoria. She nodded slightly, then looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Hayes, I want to be very clear about something. Your firm's error cost us. Real money, real opportunity. We're not going to pretend otherwise." "I understand, ma'am. But what you've built here is more valuable than the original report ever would have been, even if it had been correct." Victoria glanced at her team. "This gives us actual insight into our business. It shows us where we're weak and how to fix it. That's worth something." She turned to Marcus. "We're going to drop the legal action, but we're also going to restructure this contract. We want Mr. Hayes assigned as the lead analyst on our account, not just for this project, ongoing. And we want quarterly audits of every model you run for us, conducted by an independent third party we approve." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Done. And we want a 50% reduction in fees for the next year as compensation for the damage caused by the original error." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Acceptable. Victoria stood, extending her hand to Daniel. Impressive work, Mr. Hayes. I look forward to working with you. The handshake felt like crossing a finish line. After the Hyperion team left, the conference room erupted. Catherine actually hugged Daniel. Robert shook his hand so vigorously it hurt. Marcus looked like he'd aged backward 5 years. You did it, Marcus said, still somewhat stunned. You actually did it. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. We did it. Team effort. Don't give me that humble nonsense. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm calling HR right now to process your employment paperwork. I want you officially on staff by Monday. Senior analytics specialist, just like Catherine proposed. And that $50,000 completion bonus? Consider it approved. The number hit Daniel all over again. $50,000, plus a salary of $120,000, plus benefits. He'd walked into this building 4 days ago hoping for any job that might pay enough to cover rent. There's one condition, Daniel said. Marcus lowered his phone. What's that? I need Fridays off at 3 p.m. Non-negotiable. My daughter gets out of school at 3:15 and I've missed too many pickups already. Marcus laughed. Done. Anything else? That's it. Then welcome to Sterling Analytics, Daniel. Officially, this time. That evening, Daniel picked Sophie up from Mrs. Chen's apartment. She launched herself at him the moment he walked through the door, her arms wrapping around his waist. Daddy, Mrs. Chen said you were doing something really, really important. I was, sweetheart. He lifted her up, even though she was getting too big for it, just because he could. And it went really well. Does that mean we're not poor anymore? The question broke his heart and healed it at the same time. It means things are going to be easier, he said carefully. It means I got a new job that pays better. It means we can afford things we couldn't before. Like the field trip? Definitely the field trip. And maybe some other things too. What do you think about going out for dinner tonight? Anywhere you want. Sophie's eyes went wide. Even the place with the fancy noodles? Even there. They went to the Japanese restaurant she'd been asking about for months, the one with the window seats overlooking the river. Sophie ordered udon and gyoza and ice cream for dessert, and Daniel didn't even look at the prices. Over dinner, she told him about her week, about the drawings she'd made, the book her teacher had read, the friend who'd invited her to a birthday party next month. Daniel listened to every word and felt something shift in his chest. For 7 years, he'd been running just to stay in place, scrambling for every dollar, every opportunity, every moment of stability. And now, finally, there was space to breathe. Daddy? Sophie looked at him with those serious eyes that were too old for 7 years. Are you happy? Yes, baby. I'm very happy. Good. She smiled and went back to her noodles, satisfied. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Daniel sat at his laptop and opened his email. There was a message from Marcus with the official employment offer attached. He read through it carefully, hardly believing the numbers were real. Start date, Monday. Position, Senior Analytics Specialist. Salary, $120,000 annually. Benefits, health insurance, dental, vision, 401k matching, 3 weeks PTO. He clicked accept and watched the confirmation message appear. Then he opened a new email and typed carefully. Dear Professor Martinez, I wanted to let you know that I've just accepted a position at Sterling Analytics as a Senior Analytics Specialist. I know it's been a long road since I had to leave Northwestern, and there were many times I thought I'd never make it to this kind of opportunity. But your continued mentorship and your belief in my abilities made all the difference. I'm finally in a position where I might be able to finish my degree. I'd like to talk to you about what that would look like. Evening courses, online options, whatever might work alongside the new job. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I'd nearly given up on myself. Gratefully, Daniel Hayes. He hit send and closed the laptop. Through the window, the city lights spread out like stars. Somewhere out there were other people fighting the same battles he'd fought. Unfinished degrees, single-parent struggles, doors that wouldn't open no matter how hard they knocked. Daniel hoped they'd find their moment, too. The moment when someone finally saw what they could do instead of what they lacked. He walked to Sophie's room and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. She had his nose and her mother's eyes. Elizabeth, who'd left when Sophie was 2, unable to handle the weight of parenthood. For 5 years, it had been just the two of them against the world. "We're going to be okay," he whispered. "Better than okay." Monday morning would bring new challenges. Learning the firm's systems, building relationships with colleagues, proving himself beyond the crisis moment that had earned him this chance. There would be long days and difficult projects and moments when he'd question whether he really belonged. But tonight, for the first time in 7 years, Daniel Hayes went to bed without the crushing weight of financial terror pressing down on his chest. He'd proven something important, not to Sterling Analytics, not to Hyperion Digital, but to himself. That competence mattered more than credentials. That insight could be more valuable than pedigree. That the right opportunity at the right moment could change everything. The interview might have been over, but his story was just beginning. Monday morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that made Daniel's coffee taste like electricity. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting the new tie he'd bought over the weekend, dark blue silk that Sophie had helped him pick out at the department store. She'd insisted it made him look like a real boss, which had made him laugh even as his wallet protested the $40 price tag. But he had $40 now. He had more than $40. The reality still felt surreal. The Sterling Analytics building looked different when he walked through the lobby at 8:30 a.m. The security guard, who'd barely glanced at him during his interview, now smiled and handed him a permanent access badge with his photo already printed on it. His name was there in bold letters: Daniel Hayes, Senior Analytics Specialist. Catherine met him at the elevator bank on the 14th floor, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that was equal parts welcoming and conspiratorial. "Ready for the grand tour?" she asked as the doors opened. "As ready as I'll ever be." The analytics department occupied the entire 15th floor, an open workspace filled with standing desks, dual monitor setups, and enough whiteboards to teach a small university. 20-some analysts looked up as Catherine led Daniel through the floor, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. "Everyone, this is Daniel Hayes," Catherine announced. "Most of you have heard about the Hyperion situation. Daniel is the reason we still have Hyperion as a client. He'll be leading their account going forward and working on several other enterprise projects as well." A woman in her late 20s with bright red glasses approached them, extending her hand. "Rachel Morrison. I handle the Zenith Tech portfolio. Catherine mentioned you built that user segmentation model in 3 days?" 72 hours, Daniel corrected, shaking her hand, "though I wouldn't recommend that timeline for anything that isn't a crisis." Rachel laughed. "I'd love to see the architecture sometime. We've been trying to implement something similar for Zenith, but the churn prediction keeps fighting us." "Happy to help," Daniel said, meaning it. A younger man with carefully styled hair and an expensive watch hung back near one of the desks, arms crossed. Daniel recognized the posture. Jonathan Pierce, the analytics director who'd built the flawed Hyperion model, the man whose mistake Daniel had corrected. Their eyes met for a moment. Jonathan's expression was carefully neutral, but something cold flickered beneath the surface. Catherine either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. "Your workspace is over here," she said, leading Daniel to a corner desk with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. 2 large monitors were already set up, and a small nameplate sat on the desk: Daniel Hayes. "Marcus wanted you to have one of the premium spots," Catherine explained. "The senior analysts get window seats. It's a whole status thing that I personally find ridiculous, but the view is nice." Boom! Daniel set down his messenger bag. Also new, purchased Saturday afternoon at Sophie's insistence that his old backpack looked like it survived a war, and looked out at the city sprawling below. From up here, everything seemed possible. "I'll let you get settled," Catherine said. "We have a team meeting at 10 to go over the week's priorities. In the meantime, your login credentials should be active. The welcome packet has information about benefits enrollment, parking validation, all the administrative stuff. HR wants to meet with you at 2 to finish the paperwork." After she left, Daniel sat in the expensive ergonomic chair and logged into the system. His email inbox was already populated with welcome messages, calendar invites, and access confirmations for various databases and project management tools. He was reading through the benefits documentation. Health insurance with dental and vision, the words still feeling like a foreign language after years without coverage, when someone cleared their throat behind him. Jonathan stood there, hands in his pockets, his expression carefully composed. "Got a minute?" Jonathan asked. Of course. Jonathan glanced around, then lowered his voice. Look, I'm not here to make this weird. What happened with Hyperion was on me. I should have caught that retention calculation error, and I didn't. You did. That's the reality. Daniel waited, sensing there was more coming. But I want to be clear about something. Jonathan's tone hardened slightly. I've been at this firm for 6 years, built most of the frameworks we use for client reporting. I have an advanced degree from Stanford and 3 years of experience at McKinsey before I came here. So when you're working on projects, especially anything that touches my existing models, I expect professional courtesy. That means consultation, not unilateral changes. Understood, Daniel said evenly. I'm not here to step on anyone's toes. I'm here to do good work. Good. Jonathan's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Then we won't have any problems. Welcome to the team. He walked away before Daniel could respond. Rachel appeared a moment later, sliding into the empty chair beside Daniel's desk. Don't let him get to you, she said quietly. Jonathan's ego took a hit, and he's going to need time to process that. But he's not actually a bad guy, just proud. I get it, Daniel said. I'd probably feel the same way if our positions were reversed. Maybe, but you also probably wouldn't have made that mistake in the first place. Rachel grinned. Anyway, fair warning, the team meeting this morning is going to be intense. Marcus wants to restructure how we handle quality assurance after the Hyperion scare, which means everyone's defensive about their existing processes. She was right. The 10 a.m. meeting in the main conference room felt like walking into a pressure cooker. Marcus sat at the head of the table, flanked by Catherine and Robert Chen. The entire analytics team filled the remaining seats. 15 people whose livelihoods had nearly been destroyed by one error. Let's get started, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the low conversations. I want to talk about what happened with Hyperion and make sure it never happens again. Daniel, you're new, but you're also the person who identified and fixed the problem, so I want you to walk everyone through what you found. Daniel felt every eye in the room turn toward him. He stood, moving to the projection screen, and pulled up the presentation he'd prepared over the weekend. The core issue was an architectural assumption, he began. The model treated account creation as equivalent to user engagement. That works fine for platforms where registration equals active use. But for subscription-based services like Hyperion, there's a critical gap between registration and ongoing engagement. He walked them through the flawed calculation, showing exactly where the logic had broken down. Jonathan sat rigid in his chair, jaw tight. The fix required rebuilding the entire user classification system, Daniel continued, segmenting by actual behavior rather than account status. But the larger question is how this error went undetected for 6 months. That's what I want to address, Marcus interjected. We need a peer review system. Every model, every analysis gets reviewed by at least 2 other analysts before it goes to a client. No exceptions. A man in his 40s with graying temples raised his hand. That's going to significantly slow down our delivery timelines. Some clients expect turnaround in 48 hours. Then we set better expectations, Marcus said flatly. I'd rather deliver accurate analysis slowly than fast garbage that destroys our reputation. Catherine, I want you to design the review protocol. Daniel, you'll help her. You've got fresh eyes on our processes, and I want to know what else might be broken that we're too close to see. Daniel nodded, ignoring the flash of resentment he saw cross Jonathan's face. The meeting continued for another hour, covering project assignments, client updates, and the new quality assurance framework. By the time it ended, Daniel's head was spinning with information. Client names, project codes, deadline pressures, interpersonal dynamics. He was only beginning to understand. Rachel caught up with him in the hallway afterward. Lunch? She offered. There's a good Thai place 2 blocks over. I can fill you in on the office politics you just stepped into. Over pad thai and spring rolls, Rachel sketched out the landscape of sterling analytics with brutal honesty. Marcus built this firm from nothing 15 years ago, she explained. He's brilliant but terrifying when things go wrong. Catherine is the diplomatic counterweight. She handles client relationships and keeps Marcus from burning bridges. Robert is the operations genius who makes sure we actually get paid and don't collapse under our own success. And Jonathan? Daniel asked. Rachel sighed. Jonathan is complicated. He's legitimately talented. The frameworks he built for predictive modeling are really sophisticated. But he's also intensely competitive and doesn't handle criticism well. When you corrected his Hyperion model in front of everyone, you basically nuked his standing in the firm. I wasn't trying to. I know. You were trying to save the client, but impact matters more than intention. Rachel speared a piece of chicken. My advice? Find a way to collaborate with him on something. Let him save face by contributing to a success. Otherwise, he's going to undermine you every chance he gets. Daniel considered that. What about you? How do you fit into all this? Me? I'm the steady middle. Not the superstar, not the disaster, just consistently competent. She smiled. Which is actually a pretty good place to be. Less drama, more job security. They walked back to the office together, and Daniel spent the afternoon drowning in administrative tasks. Benefits enrollment forms. Direct deposit setup. Emergency contact information. Tax withholding elections that actually mattered now that he had real income to withhold from. At 2 p.m., he met with HR, a cheerful woman named Patricia, who walked him through the employee handbook and made him sign approximately 17 different documents. You're entitled to 3 weeks of PTO annually, Patricia explained. That accrues at a rate of 1.25 days per month. Sick time is separate. You get 10 days per year, and it rolls over if you don't use it. Health insurance kicks in after 30 days, but we can get you enrolled now so there's no gap in coverage. Health insurance. The word still felt miraculous. My daughter, Daniel said carefully. She'd be covered under the family plan? Absolutely. Dependent coverage is included. Just fill out this form with her information, and we'll get her added to the policy. Daniel filled out Sophie's name, birth date, and social security number with hands that wanted to shake. 7 years. 7 years of praying she wouldn't get sick, of stretching every dollar to cover the pediatrician visits they couldn't avoid, of lying awake at night terrified of what would happen if she needed emergency care. Now she'd have coverage. Real coverage. You okay? Patricia asked gently. Yeah. Daniel cleared his throat. This is a big change for us. Well, welcome to Sterling. We're glad to have you. By the time Daniel finished the paperwork, it was nearly 4 p.m. He packed up his laptop and headed for the elevator, determined to make good on his promise to pick Sophie up from school. The bus ride across town felt different now. The same route he'd taken 1,000 times while job hunting, but this time he was heading home from actual employment, with actual benefits, and an actual future that didn't involve constant panic about making rent. He reached Sophie's elementary school just as the final bell rang, positioning himself near the front gate where she always looked for him. Kids poured out of the building in chaotic streams, backpacks bouncing, voices high with the particular energy of Friday afternoon freedom. Except it was Monday, and they still had 4 more days of school ahead. Sophie spotted him and ran over, her backpack nearly as big as she was. Daddy, you came! I promised I would, didn't I? Every Friday at 3:15. It's Monday. I know, but I wanted to pick you up today too. Special occasion. He took her backpack and slung it over his shoulder. How was school? We learned about fractions. I hate fractions. Fractions are important, sweetie. You sound like Mrs. Patterson. Sophie grabbed his hand as they walked toward the bus stop. Did you have a good day at your new job? I did. Met the team, got my desk set up, learned about 1 million new things. Do you like it? Daniel thought about Jonathan's barely concealed hostility, about the pressure of Marcus's expectations, about the sheer volume of information he needed to absorb. But he also thought about Rachel's kindness, about the view from his window, about health insurance forms with Sophie's name on them. Yeah, he said, I really do. That evening, after dinner and homework, and the usual bedtime routine, Daniel sat at his laptop reviewing the Hyperion account files. Catherine had sent him access to the complete project history, 6 months of reports, data extracts, client correspondence. He needed to understand not just what had gone wrong, but everything else that might be hiding beneath the surface. If he was going to be the lead analyst on this account, he needed to know it inside and out. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Rachel. Got your number from the directory. Quick question. Are you free Wednesday evening? The team usually does drinks at Murphy's Bar on Wednesdays. Good way to get to know everyone outside the office pressure cooker. Daniel hesitated. Socializing with coworkers felt like a luxury from another life, something people with stable jobs and disposable income did. But he was one of those people now. Or at least he was supposed to be. Sure, he typed back. What time? 6:30. It's casual. First drink is on me as a welcome. Thanks. See you there. He set the phone down and returned to the Hyperion files, but his mind kept drifting. This was really happening. He was building a life beyond survival mode, making friends, planning social events, having conversations about work that didn't involve desperation. The next 3 days settled into a rhythm. Daniel arrived at the office by 8:30 each morning, earlier than most of the team, but later than Marcus, who apparently survived on 4 hours of sleep and pure intensity. He spent his days deep in the Hyperion data, familiarizing himself with every aspect of their business model, user base, and strategic goals. Victoria Hyperion's team had scheduled their first quarterly review for 3 weeks out, which meant Daniel needed to have comprehensive analytics ready to present. Not just the corrected retention model, but actionable insights about user behavior, growth opportunities, and operational efficiency. He worked through lunch most days, surviving on coffee and the surprisingly good sandwiches from the building's cafe. Rachel usually joined him, and gradually others did too. A quiet analyst named Kevin, who specialized in financial modeling, a sharp woman named Lisa, who handled the healthcare clients, even Jonathan once or twice, though those lunches were tense with unspoken competition. On Wednesday evening, Daniel took the bus to Murphy's Bar and found half the analytics team already there, occupying a cluster of tables near the back. The atmosphere was completely different from the office, looser, louder, more honest. Rachel waved him over and made good on her promise, buying him a beer that tasted significantly better than the cheap stuff he used to allow himself on particularly rough days. "So," she said, sliding into the seat beside him, "3 days in, still happy you took the job?" "Ask me after the Hyperion quarterly review." "Fair," she laughed. "That's going to be intense. Victoria doesn't suffer mediocrity." Kevin joined them, setting down a whiskey. "I heard Marcus already has you working on the quality assurance protocol with Catherine. How's that going?" "Slowly," Daniel admitted. "We're trying to design something thorough enough to catch errors without being so cumbersome that it kills productivity." "Good luck with that balance." Lisa appeared with a glass of wine. "Every process improvement sounds great in theory, until you're trying to meet a Friday deadline and the peer review system requires 3 sign-offs." The conversation flowed easily, touching on office dynamics, client horror stories, and the particular pressures of analytics work where a single decimal point error could cost millions. Daniel found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years, laughing at Kevin's impression of a particularly demanding client, contributing his own stories from his freelance days when he dealt with business owners who didn't understand why just make the numbers look better wasn't a viable analysis strategy. Jonathan arrived around 7:30, and the energy shifted slightly. He ordered an expensive scotch and joined their table, positioning himself at the opposite end from Daniel. "Hayes," Jonathan said after his first sip, "Rachel tells me you're rebuilding the entire user engagement framework for Hyperion. Ambitious?" "Necessary," Daniel replied evenly. "The client needs comprehensive analytics, not just corrected calculations. Just make sure you're not over-engineering it. Sometimes simple is better than sophisticated. And sometimes sophisticated is what the situation requires." Daniel kept his tone professional. "I'm building what Hyperion needs, not what's easiest." Rachel shot him a warning look, but Jonathan just smiled into his scotch. "Confidence. I respect that. Let's see if the results back it up." The rest of the evening passed without incident, but Daniel left around 9, conscious of the early morning ahead and the babysitter he'd hired to stay with Sophie. The expense still made him wince, $15 an hour, but Mrs. Chen had her own family obligations and couldn't watch Sophie every evening. Besides, he could afford it now. That reality was slowly sinking in. Thursday and Friday blurred together in a haze of data analysis and model building. Daniel constructed user journey maps showing how people moved through Hyperion's platform, identifying friction points where engagement dropped and opportunities where small changes could significantly improve retention. He built a churn prediction model that could identify at-risk users 30 days before they canceled, giving Hyperion's customer success team time to intervene. He developed a lifetime value calculator that accounted for different user segments and behavior patterns, providing much more accurate revenue forecasting than the previous model's fantasy metrics. By Friday evening, he had something substantial to show Catherine and Marcus. The review meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. in Marcus's office. A corner space with panoramic windows and enough expensive furniture to furnish Daniel's entire apartment twice over. Catherine was already there when Daniel arrived, along with Robert Chen. "Show us what you've got," Marcus said without preamble. Daniel connected his laptop to the wall-mounted display and walked them through the new analytics framework. He'd prepared for this presentation as carefully as he'd prepared for the Hyperion crisis meeting, anticipating questions and building in layers of detail they could explore. Catherine leaned forward as he showed the churn prediction model. "This is remarkable. If Hyperion can actually intervene before users cancel, that alone could save them millions in acquisition costs. The model currently has 71% accuracy," Daniel explained. "I think we can push that to 80% with more training data, but even at current levels, it's actionable." Robert studied the lifetime value calculations. "You're segmenting by acquisition channel and engagement level. How confident are you in these projections?" "I validated against 3 years of historical data. The margin of error is within 5% for most segments." Daniel pulled up the validation charts. "The high-touch enterprise customers show the most variance, but that's because the sample size is smaller and their behavior is more unpredictable." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the displays. Then he looked at Daniel with an expression that might have been approval. "This is the quality of work I expect from senior analysts. Not just fixing problems, but building solutions that create value." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. You still need to sell this to Victoria Hyperion in 2.5 weeks. If she's not impressed, none of this matters." "Understood." After the meeting, Catherine walked with Daniel back to the main floor. "You're doing really well," she said quietly. "I know this week was probably overwhelming, but you're handling it like you've been here for years." "I'm faking about 60% of the confidence," Daniel admitted. "Everyone is. That's the secret of professional life." Catherine smiled. "The people who succeed aren't the ones who never feel overwhelmed. They're the ones who keep moving forward anyway." That evening, Daniel picked up Sophie from aftercare, another new expense that was slowly becoming routine, and took her to the park near their apartment. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with the kind of golden late afternoon light that made everything look like a photograph. Sophie ran straight for the swings, her backpack abandoned on the bench beside Daniel. He pushed her, listening to her delighted shrieks, and felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized was still clenched tight. "Higher, Daddy! Higher! Any higher and you'll fly away." "Good! I want to fly!" He pushed her higher, watching her hair stream behind her like a banner. This was what he'd been fighting for all along. Not the salary or the title or the nice office with the window view. This. Moments where his daughter could just be a kid, without the weight of their struggles crushing the joy out of everything. "Daddy?" Sophie called as the swing arced down. "Can Maya come over for a play date this weekend?" Maya was the girl from her class she'd mentioned a few times, the one whose birthday party was coming up. Daniel's instinct was to say no, to avoid the complexity of hosting another child, the expense of snacks and entertainment, the risk that Maya's parents would judge their small apartment or worn furniture. But that was old thinking, survival thinking. "Sure, sweetie. Let me talk to Maya's parents and we'll set something up." "Really?" Sophie's face lit up brighter than the setting sun. "Can we make cookies?" "We can definitely make cookies." Later that night, after Sophie was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a notebook and did something he hadn't done in years. He made a plan that extended beyond next month's rent. Financial goals, career objectives, things he wanted to accomplish not just to survive, but to actually build something. 6 months. Complete the quality assurance protocol with Catherine. Deliver exceptional results for Hyperion's quarterly reviews. Build relationships with the team. Maybe, tentatively, explore finishing his degree. 1 year. Establish himself as one of Sterling's top analysts. Take on additional high-value clients. Save enough for a real emergency fund, not just the desperate scramble of robbing Peter to pay Paul. 5 years. Senior leadership position. Enough financial stability that Sophie could focus on being a kid instead of worrying about money. Maybe if he was being really ambitious, the kind of reputation in the industry where people knew his name. It felt absurd writing it down. A week ago, his 5-year plan had been find any job that pays rent and includes benefits. Now he was mapping out a path to actual success, But then again, a week ago he'd been unemployed. Now he had a corner desk with a window view and health insurance that covered his daughter. A lot could change in a week. His phone buzzed with an email notification. Catherine, sending the latest draft of the peer review protocol they'd been designing. Daniel opened it, made notes on the sections that needed refinement, and sent back his comments. Then he opened his conversation with Professor Martinez and saw that his former mentor had replied to his weekend email. Daniel, I'm thrilled to hear about your new position. I always knew you'd find your way. Regarding finishing your degree, Northwestern has a program for working professionals, mostly evening and online courses. You'd only need 12 credits to complete your bachelor's. Let's schedule a call to discuss options. 12 credits. 1 semester, maybe 2 if he went part-time. Daniel stared at the message, feeling possibility bloom in his chest like spring after a brutal winter. The degree he'd abandoned 7 years ago wasn't out of reach. It was right there, waiting for him to be ready to claim it. He typed back, "Thank you, Professor. I'd love to discuss this. How about next week?" The reply came within minutes. "Tuesday at 7 p.m. I'll send you a Zoom link. Perfect. See you then." Daniel closed his laptop and looked around his small kitchen, the same space where he'd sat countless nights tallying expenses he couldn't afford, stretching grocery budgets that never quite stretched far enough, wondering how long he could keep Sophie's life together with determination and duct tape. The apartment hadn't changed. The same worn linoleum, same secondhand furniture, same crack in the ceiling plaster that his landlord kept promising to fix. But everything else had changed. Everything. He thought about calling his mother, who lived 3 states away and barely scraped by on Social Security. She'd been the one who'd urged him to finish school, who'd been devastated when he dropped out to take care of Sophie after Elizabeth left. He wanted to tell her that it had finally worked out, that the sacrifice hadn't been for nothing, that he was going to finish what he'd started. But it was late, and she went to bed early these days. The conversation could wait until the weekend. Instead, Daniel walked to Sophie's room and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep the way he had a week ago. But this time, the crushing weight of financial terror wasn't pressing down on his chest. This time, when he thought about her future, he saw possibilities instead of limitations. She stirred slightly, clutching her stuffed rabbit closer. Daniel stepped into the room and adjusted her blanket, then kissed her forehead gently. "We're going to be more than okay," he whispered. "I promise." Monday arrived with new challenges already queued in his inbox. Marcus wanted a preliminary framework for the quality assurance protocol by Wednesday. Victoria Hyperion's team had sent through a list of additional metrics they wanted included in the quarterly review. Rachel needed his input on a Zenith Tech analysis that was fighting her. Daniel tackled each item systematically, building momentum. The office felt less foreign now, the faces more familiar. Kevin stopped by his desk to discuss the financial models he was building. Lisa asked his opinion on a healthcare analytics problem she was stuck on. Even Jonathan engaged him in a discussion about predictive algorithm optimization that was almost civil. The week accelerated toward the Hyperion quarterly review like a freight train gathering speed. Daniel refined his models, validated his calculations, and built presentation materials that could withstand the kind of scrutiny Victoria's team would bring. On Thursday afternoon, Catherine called him into a conference room where she'd spread out the complete quality assurance protocol they'd been developing. "I think we've got something Marcus will approve," she said, pointing to the flowchart they'd designed. 3-tier review system, self-audit checklist, peer validation, and senior analyst sign-off. But we've built in flexibility based on project scope and urgency. Daniel studied the framework, looking for weak points. What about time-sensitive crisis situations like Hyperion? This process would have taken days. Exception protocol. Catherine flipped to another page. For genuine emergencies, we allow expedited review with mandatory post-crisis audit. Covers the urgent need without sacrificing accountability. That works? Daniel nodded. When do we present to Marcus? Tomorrow afternoon. If he approves, we'll start rolling it out next week. Catherine paused. This has been really good work, Daniel. You have strong instincts for process design. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to contribute. After she left, Daniel sat in the empty conference room and allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. 2 weeks ago, he'd been walking into an interview hoping for any chance. Now he was designing firm-wide protocols that would shape how Sterling Analytics operated. The trajectory was almost dizzying. That evening, he kept his promise and picked Sophie up at 3:15, exactly as he'd committed to doing every Friday. She ran to him with her usual enthusiasm, backpack bouncing, and showed him a drawing she'd made in art class, a stick figure family consisting of a tall figure labeled Daddy and a small figure labeled Me standing in front of a building labeled Daddy's Work. "That's beautiful, sweetie." "Mrs. Patterson says we're supposed to draw our families doing important things. Your work is important, right?" "I think so. I hope so." "Then it's perfect." Sophie grabbed his hand. "Can we get ice cream?" Daniel thought about his budget, but more importantly, he thought about the direct deposit confirmation he'd received that morning, his first actual paycheck from Sterling Analytics, deposited automatically into his checking account like magic. "Yeah," he said, squeezing her hand. "We can definitely get ice cream." They walked to the ice cream shop 3 blocks from Sophie's school, the one they used to pass every day while Daniel explained why they couldn't afford to stop. Sophie ordered 2 scoops of chocolate chip cookie dough. Daniel got vanilla with caramel sauce. They sat at one of the outdoor tables and ate their ice cream in the afternoon sunshine. And Daniel tried to memorize the moment, the taste of caramel, the warmth of the sun, his daughter's chocolate-smudged smile. "Daddy?" Sophie said between bites. "Are you happy now?" It was the second time she'd asked him that question. Daniel wondered what she'd seen in his face all those years, what weight she'd carried watching him struggle. "Yes, baby, I'm very happy." "Good," Sophie nodded seriously. "You smile more now. I like it when you smile." The words hit him harder than they should have. 7 years of trying to shield her from his stress, and apparently she'd seen everything anyway. "I'm going to keep smiling," he promised. "Things are going to keep getting better." "I know." She went back to her ice cream, satisfied. Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. Marcus approved the QA protocol. "Rolling out Monday. Great work." He typed back a quick thank you, then set the phone aside and focused on his daughter. The work would still be there later. The emails would still need answering. The Hyperion review would still loom large in his calendar. But right now, in this moment, Sophie was 7 years old and eating ice cream in the sunshine, and nothing else mattered more than that. The morning of the Hyperion quarterly review arrived with unseasonable rain hammering against Daniel's apartment windows. He stood in front of the mirror adjusting his tie for the 3rd time, while Sophie ate cereal at the kitchen table and offered unsolicited fashion advice. "The blue tie is better than the red one," she announced between bites. "It matches your eyes." "Since when do you know about matching ties to eye color?" "Maya's mom told me. She says matching is important for looking professional." Daniel smiled despite his nerves. Sophie had become fast friends with Maya after their play date the previous weekend, and apparently Maya's mother, a corporate lawyer, had strong opinions about business attire. "The blue tie it is, then." He checked his reflection one more time, grabbed his messenger bag, and kissed Sophie's forehead. "Mrs. Chen will pick you up from school today. I'll probably be late." "Because of the big meeting?" "Yeah, the really big meeting." Sophie looked at him with those 2 serious eyes. "You're going to do great, Daddy. You always do great." The confidence in her voice made his chest tight. "Thanks, sweetie. I love you." "Love you too. Don't forget to smile." The bus ride downtown felt longer than usual, each stoplight an eternity. Daniel reviewed his presentation materials on his phone, double-checking calculations he'd already verified a dozen times. The rain continued, turning the city streets into rivers of gray water that taxis splashed through with aggressive disregard for pedestrians. He reached Sterling Analytics at 9 a.m., 2 hours before the Hyperion team was scheduled to arrive. The office was already buzzing with nervous energy. Catherine pacing near the executive conference room, Marcus barking instructions into his phone, Robert coordinating with the catering staff about refreshments. Rachel found Daniel at his desk, where he was doing a final review of the interactive dashboard on his laptop. "You okay?" she asked, setting down a cup of coffee beside him. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad." "That's approximately how I feel. For what it's worth, I reviewed your models yesterday. They're exceptional. If Victoria's team doesn't see that, they're idiots. Idiots who control a multi-million-dollar contract." "Fair point." Rachel perched on the edge of his desk. "Just remember, you're the one who saved this relationship in the first place. They're coming here because you proved you know what you're doing. You've already won. This is just the victory lap. Daniel wished he had her confidence. The past 2 weeks had been a blur of building, refining, and validating analytics that would determine whether Hyperion stayed with Sterling or took their business elsewhere. Every model needed to be perfect. Every insight needed to be actionable. Every presentation slide needed to withstand hostile scrutiny. At 10:30, Catherine appeared at his desk. "They're here early. Conference room in 5 minutes." Daniel's heart kicked into overdrive. He grabbed his laptop and notebook and followed Catherine to the executive conference room, where the Sterling team was already assembling. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his expression carved from stone. Robert reviewed notes on his tablet. Jonathan sat near the window, arms crossed, watching Daniel with an unreadable expression. The door opened and Victoria Hyperion entered, followed by her Chief Analytics Officer David Park, COO Michelle Torres, and 2 other executives Daniel didn't recognize. They settled into their seats with the practiced efficiency of people who attended 50 meetings like this every month. Victoria's gaze found Daniel immediately. "Mr. Hayes, I'm looking forward to seeing what you've built." "Thank you for the opportunity, Ms. Hyperion." Daniel connected his laptop to the projection system, willing his hands to stay steady. Marcus opened the meeting with brief pleasantries, acknowledging the rocky start to the relationship and emphasizing Sterling's commitment to delivering exceptional analytics going forward. Then he turned the floor over to Daniel. "Over the past 2 weeks, we've completely rebuilt the Hyperion Analytics framework," Daniel began, pulling up the first dashboard. "Today I'm going to walk you through what we've discovered about your actual user base, the opportunities we've identified, and the strategic recommendations we believe will drive significant growth." He started with the corrected retention metrics, showing the real numbers without softening the blow. 37% active retention was painful to see, but it was true, and truth was the only foundation worth building on. David Park leaned forward, studying the segmentation breakdown. "You're categorizing our churned users into distinct groups. Walk me through that methodology." Daniel switched to the churn analysis dashboard. "We identified 5 primary churn triggers. Price-sensitive users who left after rate increases but showed high engagement before departure. These users have a 34% reactivation probability with targeted promotional pricing. Technical issue departures who experienced platform problems. They rarely return without direct outreach about fixes, but when contacted, 52% will reactivate. Feature gap users who needed functionality you don't currently offer. Low reactivation potential unless product development addresses their needs. Natural attrition users who simply lost interest with no clear trigger, very low reactivation probability, not worth significant investment. And competitor switch users who move to rival platforms, moderate reactivation potential if you can demonstrate superior value. Michelle Torres, the COO, was taking rapid notes. This is significantly more sophisticated than the binary active versus inactive classification we've been using internally. Thus, the binary model treats all churned users the same, Daniel explained. But a user who left because of a temporary price sensitivity is fundamentally different from a user who found a competitor with better features. The intervention strategies need to be different too. He walked them through the lifetime value recalculations, showing how the previous model had inflated projections by treating dormant accounts as future revenue sources. The new model segmented users by engagement patterns and subscription history, providing much more accurate forecasting. Victoria's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were sharp, tracking every detail. "What's your confidence interval on these lifetime value projections?" "Within 5% for most segments, validated against 3 years of historical data. The high-touch enterprise segment shows more variance, 8 to 10%, because the sample size is smaller and their behavior is more unpredictable." "Show me the validation methodology." Daniel pulled up the backtesting results, demonstrating how the model's predictions aligned with actual customer behavior over the validation period. David Park interrupted twice with technical questions about the statistical approaches, and both times Daniel had the answers ready. An hour into the presentation, they took a brief break. Daniel stepped out into the hallway, his shirt damp with nervous sweat despite the office air conditioning. Rachel appeared beside him with a water bottle. "You're killing it," she whispered. "David looks impressed, and he's impossible to impress." Victoria's impossible to read. That's just her face. She wouldn't still be here if she wasn't interested. When they reconvened, Daniel moved into the strategic recommendations section. This was where theory met practice, where his analysis needed to translate into actions that Hyperion could actually implement. Based on the user behavior patterns we've identified, we're recommending a 3-phase retention strategy, Daniel said, pulling up the implementation roadmap. Phase 1 focuses on the low-hanging fruit, price-sensitive churned users who showed high engagement. A targeted win-back campaign offering limited-time promotional pricing could reactivate approximately 45,000 users within 60 days, generating an estimated $2.3 million in recovered annual recurring revenue. Michelle Torres's pen moved faster across her notepad. What's the cost assumption for that campaign? Conservative estimate of $12 per reactivated user for promotional discounting and outreach costs. Total campaign investment around $540,000. Net positive return of $1.7 million in the first year. Phase 2 addresses the at-risk users who haven't churned yet but show warning signs, Daniel continued. The predictive model I've built can identify these users 30 days before they're likely to cancel. Early intervention, personalized outreach, feature education, usage optimization could reduce churn by an estimated 15 to 20%. David Park spoke up. You mentioned 71% accuracy on the churn prediction model during our last meeting. Has that improved? We're now at 74% with the additional training data from the past 2 weeks. I believe we can reach 80% within 3 months as the model continues learning from real outcomes. And Phase 3? Victoria asked, speaking for the first time in 20 minutes. Phase 3 is the long game, product development based on feature gap analysis. We've identified the most common reasons users cite for leaving when better functionality is available from competitors. The top 3 gaps are mobile app performance, advanced analytics capabilities, and integration options with enterprise software suites. Addressing these systematically over the next 12 to 18 months could reduce feature gap churn by up to 40%. Daniel pulled up the final dashboard, showing the projected impact of all 3 phases combined. Conservative estimates suggest this strategy could improve your overall retention from 37% to 52% within 18 months, translating to approximately $18 million in additional annual recurring revenue. The room went quiet. Victoria studied the projections, her expression still unreadable. Michelle and David exchanged glances that Daniel couldn't interpret. Marcus sat perfectly still, barely breathing. Finally, Victoria spoke. Mr. Hayes, I'm going to be direct with you. When we came here 2 weeks ago, I was prepared to terminate our contract with Sterling Analytics. The errors in your previous reporting weren't just embarrassing, they were dangerous. We made strategic decisions based on fundamentally flawed data. Daniel's stomach clenched, but he kept his expression neutral. However, Victoria continued, what you've presented today is the most comprehensive and actionable user analytics I've seen from any consulting firm we've worked with. The segmentation framework alone is worth the consulting fees. The churn prediction model could be transformative for our business. And the strategic roadmap is exactly the kind of thinking we need from a true partner, not just a vendor. She turned to Marcus. Sterling Analytics will remain our analytics partner, but I want Daniel personally assigned to our account for the next 12 months minimum, and I want quarterly reviews of this caliber every 90 days. Marcus nodded, his relief barely concealed. Done. Daniel will be your dedicated lead analyst, supported by our full team. Good. Victoria stood, extending her hand to Daniel. Exceptional work, Mr. Hayes. I look forward to seeing these strategies implemented. The handshake was firm, professional, and carried the weight of validation that Daniel had been chasing for years. After the Hyperion team departed, the Sterling conference room erupted in barely controlled celebration. Catherine hugged Daniel hard enough to crack ribs. Robert shook his hand with genuine warmth. Even Jonathan offered a grudging nod of acknowledgement. Marcus pulled Daniel aside as the others dispersed. That was exactly what we needed. Hyperion is now our flagship success story instead of our biggest failure. You did that. Thank you, sir. I'm increasing your base salary to $140 effective immediately, and I want you to start thinking about team leadership. We're going to need to expand the analytics department to handle the growth trajectory we're on, and I want you involved in building that team. $140,000. Team leadership. The words felt surreal. I appreciate your confidence, Daniel managed. It's not confidence, it's recognition of demonstrated capability. Marcus's phone buzzed and he glanced at it. I need to take this. Enjoy the win, Daniel. You earned it. After Marcus left, Daniel stood alone in the conference room, staring at the projection screen that still displayed his final dashboard. 6 months ago, he'd been sitting in his apartment calculating whether he could afford Sophie's field trip. 2 weeks ago, he'd been walking into an interview expecting rejection. Now he was building teams and earning a salary that seemed fictional. His phone vibrated with a text from Rachel. Drinks at Murphy's tonight, non-negotiable. Team's buying to celebrate. Daniel smiled and typed back, I'll be there. He spent the rest of the afternoon fielding congratulations from colleagues and responding to Catherine's email about transitioning the quality assurance protocol to full implementation. The normal rhythm of work felt different now, less like proving himself and more like building something sustainable. At 3 p.m., he packed up his laptop and headed out to pick up Sophie from school. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming in afternoon sunlight. Sophie spotted him at the gate and ran over with her usual enthusiasm, but today she was carrying something besides her backpack, a construction paper card decorated with crayon drawings. We made cards for people we're grateful for, she explained, handing it to him. I made mine for you. Daniel opened the card and read the carefully printed words. Thank you, Daddy, for working so hard so we can have nice things. I love you. Love, Sophie. His throat went tight. This is beautiful, sweetheart. Do you really like it? I love it. I'm going to keep it forever. They walked to the bus stop together, Sophie chattering about her day while Daniel tried to process the emotional whiplash of the past 12 hours. Professional triumph and personal gratitude colliding in a way that made him realize how far he'd come from the desperate father who used to count pennies for field trips. That evening, after settling Sophie with Mrs. Chen for a few hours, Daniel took the bus to Murphy's bar. The analytics team had claimed their usual tables, and someone had already ordered a round of celebratory drinks. Rachel waved him over, sliding a beer across the table. To Daniel, she announced, raising her glass, for saving our asses and making Hyperion love us. The team echoed the toast, and Daniel felt himself relax into the camaraderie. This was what having colleagues felt like, what having friends felt like. The kind of social connections that had been impossible to maintain when every evening was spent scrambling for freelance work or taking care of Sophie alone. Kevin cornered him near the bar an hour later. Seriously, man, that presentation was masterclass. The way you handled Victoria's questions about the validation methodology, I've seen experienced analysts crumble under less pressure. I was terrified the entire time. Couldn't tell. You looked completely confident. Fake it till you make it, right? Or maybe you've already made it and just haven't realized yet. Kevin clinked his glass against Daniel's. You're not the desperate candidate who walked in here 3 weeks ago. You're a senior analyst who just locked down our most important client. Start acting like it. The words landed with unexpected weight. Daniel had been so focused on surviving each day, each meeting, each deadline, that he hadn't stopped to recognize the transformation. He wasn't fighting for scraps anymore. He had leverage, respect, a seat at the table he'd built for himself. Jonathan approached as Kevin drifted away, carrying what looked like his third expensive scotch. His expression was complicated, resentment mixed with something that might have been grudging respect. That was good work today, Jonathan said without preamble. Thank you. I mean it. The churn prediction model especially, the trigger categorization approach is smarter than anything I've built. Jonathan took a drink. I've been thinking about what you said a couple weeks ago, about collaboration instead of competition. Daniel waited, sensing Jonathan was working towards something. I'm building a predictive framework for the Meridian account, retail analytics, forecasting seasonal demand patterns. It's been fighting me for weeks. I could use a fresh perspective. Jonathan met Daniel's eyes. If you're interested in collaborating, I think we could build something impressive. It was an olive branch wrapped in professional language. Daniel recognized the effort it had taken for Jonathan to extend it. I'd be interested, Daniel said. Why don't we schedule time next week to review what you've got? Tuesday afternoon work? Perfect. Jonathan nodded and moved away, and Rachel appeared at Daniel's elbow. Did I just witness Jonathan Pierce voluntarily asking for help? Miracles happen. Apparently so. Rachel grinned. You're good at this, the politics, the relationship building. Some people are brilliant analysts, but terrible at the human side. You're both. I spent 7 years as a freelancer. You learn to manage client relationships when your rent depends on it. Well, it shows. Marcus is already talking about you for senior leadership track. Catherine mentioned it at lunch yesterday. The conversation moved on, but Daniel's mind stuck on those words. Leadership track. 3 weeks ago, he'd been hoping for any entry-level position. Now people were discussing his management potential. He left Murphy's around 9, taking the bus back across town to pick up Sophie. Mrs. Chen answered the door with Sophie already in pajamas, half asleep on the couch. She had dinner and finished her homework, Mrs. Chen reported. Busy day at school, I think. She could barely keep her eyes open. Daniel paid her $45 for 3 hours, money he didn't have to count twice before handing over, and carried Sophie down to their apartment. She mumbled something incomprehensible against his shoulder as he navigated the stairs. After tucking her into bed, Daniel sat in his kitchen with a cup of tea and opened his laptop. An email from Professor Martinez was waiting, a comprehensive outline of what finishing his bachelor's degree would require. 12 credits, 4 classes. Northwestern's working professional program offered them online and in the evenings. He could start this summer, finish by next spring. Daniel pulled up the course catalog and started making notes. Business analytics, advanced statistics, data science principles, strategic management, classes that would complement what he was already doing at Sterling while filling in the theoretical gaps his freelance education had left. The tuition made him wince, $3,000 per course, but he could afford it now. Actually afford it, not the desperate calculation of robbing future expenses to pay current ones. He drafted an email to the admissions office requesting information about re-enrollment, then paused before sending it. This was really happening. The degree he'd abandoned 7 years ago when Sophie was born and Elizabeth left wasn't a dead dream anymore. It was a concrete goal with a clear timeline. Daniel hit send and closed the laptop. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Great work today. Marcus wants you in the Monday leadership meeting, 9 a.m. We'll be discussing department expansion plans. Leadership meeting, department expansion. A month ago, these words wouldn't have applied to his life. Now they were his Tuesday morning. Sleep came easier that night, despite the adrenaline still humming through his system from the presentation. He dreamed of conference rooms and dashboards, of Sophie graduating college someday without the burden of student loans, of building something that mattered. The weekend passed in a blur of normalcy that felt extraordinary precisely because it was normal. Saturday morning, he took Sophie to the farmer's market and bought fresh vegetables without calculating the per-pound cost difference between vendors. They made dinner together, stir-fry with actual fresh ingredients instead of whatever was cheapest. Sunday, they went to the park and flew a kite Sophie had been asking about for months. Simple pleasures that had been luxuries were becoming routine. The psychological adjustment was harder than Daniel expected. Part of him kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some catastrophe to destroy this fragile stability he'd built. But Monday arrived without disaster. Daniel dressed in one of the 2 new suits he'd bought over the weekend, a significant investment that Sophie had declared made him look like a real businessman, and headed to the office. The leadership meeting was held in Marcus's corner office, around a conference table that seated 12. Daniel recognized most of the faces, Catherine, Robert, the directors of various departments. But there were a few people he didn't know, senior partners who worked with the bigger clients, probably. Marcus started the meeting with a firm-wide update. Sterling Analytics had closed 3 new major clients in the past month, partly on the strength of the Hyperion success story. Revenue projections for the year were up 18%. They needed to scale the team to handle the growth. Which brings me to analytics department expansion, Marcus said, turning to Catherine. Catherine, you want to walk through the hiring plan? Catherine pulled up a presentation. We're proposing to add 6 new analysts over the next 4 months, 3 junior positions, 2 mid-level specialists, and 1 senior analyst to support Daniel on the enterprise accounts. The total budget impact is approximately $700,000 annually, but given our client pipeline, the ROI should be immediate. One of the senior partners Daniel didn't recognize spoke up. That's aggressive growth for one department. What's the risk if our sales projections don't materialize? The risk is we can't deliver on our existing commitments, Catherine replied. We're already operating at capacity. Daniel is personally managing Hyperion plus contributing to 3 other accounts. That's not sustainable long term. Marcus looked at Daniel. Your perspective? You're in the weeds with the actual work. Every eye in the room turned toward him. Daniel took a breath and chose his words carefully. We're at a tipping point. The quality assurance protocol we implemented adds necessary rigor, but it also adds time to every project. Without additional capacity, we're going to start missing deadlines or sacrificing quality. Either option damages client relationships. He paused. That said, hiring 6 people at once is risky if we don't have the infrastructure to support them. We'd need structured onboarding, clear project workflows, mentorship capacity. Robert Chen nodded approvingly. Sounds like you've thought about this. I've been on the receiving end of poor onboarding, Daniel said. I know what it looks like when organizations scale too fast without systems. Marcus smiled slightly. Which is why I want you involved in building those systems. Catherine, add Daniel to the hiring committee for the new analyst positions. And Daniel, I want you to draft a mentorship framework for integrating new team members, something that balances hands-on learning with actual productivity. Yes, sir. The meeting continued for another hour, covering budgets and timelines and strategic priorities. Daniel contributed when asked, but mostly he absorbed the dynamics of how decisions were made at this level. It was different from the analytical work, more political, more focused on long-term positioning than immediate results. Afterward, Catherine walked with him back to the main floor. You handled that well. Leadership meetings can be intense when you're not used to them. I felt out of my depth. Everyone does it first, but you said smart things and didn't overreach. That's the balance. Catherine paused at her office door. Marcus is grooming you for management, you know. The way he's pulling you into these conversations, giving you visibility with the senior partners, that's intentional. I've been here 3 weeks. And you've accomplished what most analysts take 3 years to build. Marcus recognizes talent, and he's not interested in wasting time with traditional hierarchies if someone proves they can operate at a higher level. The implications were simultaneously exciting and terrifying. Daniel had spent so long focused on survival that he hadn't developed ambitions beyond stability. Now stability was established, and people were expecting him to want more. Did he want more? Management responsibilities, political navigation, the pressure of leading teams instead of just doing excellent individual work? He didn't have an answer yet. Tuesday afternoon, Daniel met with Jonathan in one of the smaller conference rooms to review the Meridian Retail Forecasting project. Jonathan had the analytical framework spread across 2 monitors, showing seasonal demand patterns for a national retail chain's product categories. The model works fine for consistent categories like staples and basics, Jonathan explained, but the fashion and seasonal items are impossible to predict accurately. I'm getting 20 to 30% error margins, which is useless for inventory planning. Daniel studied the data structure. You're using historical sales as the primary predictor? Obviously, what else would I use? Fashion demand isn't primarily driven by historical patterns. It's driven by trends, which are by definition not predictable from past data alone. Daniel pulled up a separate data set. Have you incorporated social media sentiment analysis? Fashion search trends? Competitor product launch timing? Jonathan leaned forward, his expression shifting from defensive to intrigued. I hadn't considered external trend data. The internal sales history seemed like the most reliable signal. It is, for predictable categories. But fashion is about what's happening now and what's emerging, not what sold well last season. Daniel started sketching out a framework. If we build a hybrid model, historical patterns for the baseline, but weighted by real-time trend indicators for fashion categories, we might be able to reduce that error margin significantly. They worked for 2 hours, building out the approach collaboratively. Jonathan's deep understanding of the retail client's business combined with Daniel's fresh perspective on the analytical architecture, and gradually the framework took shape. By the end of the session, they had something promising. This could actually work, Jonathan said, a note of genuine excitement in his voice. I'll start building out the trend data integration. Can we meet again Thursday to review progress? Sure. As Jonathan packed up his materials, he paused. I was wrong about you. When you first showed up, I thought you were just lucky. Right place, right time, spotted an obvious error and got rewarded beyond your capability. But you're legitimately good at this. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. Don't let it go to your head. Jonathan smiled slightly. You're still the new guy. After he left, Daniel sat alone in the conference room and felt something shift. The hostility that had defined his early interactions with Jonathan was dissolving into something that might eventually become mutual respect, maybe even friendship. Building professional relationships was turning out to be as important as building analytical models. The week accelerated toward Friday, with the usual rhythm of deadlines and deliverables. Daniel drafted the mentorship framework Marcus had requested, drawing on his own experience of being thrown into deep water and having to learn to swim fast. He interviewed 3 candidates for the junior analyst positions, asking questions about how they approached problems and handled ambiguity. One candidate, a recent graduate named Amy Chen, with a mathematics degree from Berkeley, impressed him immediately. She walked through a sample dataset during her technical interview and identified a data quality issue that Daniel had deliberately planted to test attention to detail. This user ID field has duplicates that shouldn't exist if it's supposed to be the primary key, Amy said, pointing to the anomaly. Either the data export is broken or there's a fundamental schema problem. What would you do about it? Trace back to the source system and validate whether these are legitimate duplicates or an export error. Then if they're legitimate, figure out what we're actually trying to measure and adjust the analysis accordingly. Bad data in means bad insights out. Daniel made a note to recommend her strongly to Catherine. Friday afternoon arrived with the familiar rhythm of picking up Sophie from school. She ran to him at the gate carrying a permission slip and talking a mile a minute about the upcoming field trip to the Science Museum. It's next Friday, and we get to see the planetarium. And Mrs. Patterson says there's a whole section about space, and can I please go, Daddy, please? Daniel took the permission slip and saw the cost, $45, the same amount that had been impossible a month ago. Of course you can go, he said, signing the form immediately. Sophie's face lit up like sunrise. Really? Just like that? Just like that. She hugged him fiercely, and Daniel felt the weight of 7 years of struggle compress into this single moment of being able to say yes without hesitation, without calculation, without the crushing anxiety of choosing between his daughter's happiness and keeping the lights on. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and reviewed his bank account. The numbers still seemed fictional. His checking account showed a balance higher than he'd ever maintained in his adult life. His savings account, which had been perpetually empty for years, now held the completion bonus from the Hyperion crisis plus his first 2 paychecks. He transferred money to his mother, who'd been helping however she could, despite her own limited means. $500 with a note. Things are stable now. Please use this for whatever you need. More coming next month. Love you. Then he paid 3 months of rent in advance, just because he could, just to have the security of knowing they had a roof regardless of what happened. The transformation wasn't just financial, it was psychological. The constant low-grade terror that had been his baseline for years was finally releasing its grip. Daniel closed his laptop and walked to Sophie's room, standing in the doorway the way he'd done so many times before. But tonight, when he watched her sleep, he wasn't consumed with fear about tomorrow. He was thinking about possibilities, about the degree he was going to finish, about the team he was going to help build, about the future that was finally beginning to look like something other than survival. We really made it, he whispered into the darkness. We actually made it. And for the first time in 7 years, he believed it completely. 3 months into his tenure at Sterling Analytics, Daniel stood in front of a whiteboard covered with organizational charts and workflow diagrams, facing 6 new analysts who'd just completed their first week. Amy Chen sat in the front row, taking meticulous notes, while the others, 2 recent graduates and 3 career changers like Daniel himself, listened with varying degrees of confidence and anxiety. The quality assurance protocol isn't about doubting your work, Daniel explained, circling the peer review section on the board. It's about creating a safety net. Every one of us, no matter how experienced, has blind spots. The review process catches those blind spots before they reach clients. A young man named Marcus, no relation to their CEO, though the coincidence had caused some amusing confusion, raised his hand. What happens if the peer reviewer disagrees with your approach? Then you have a conversation. Analytics isn't like math where there's one right answer. It's about choosing the best approach for the specific situation, and sometimes reasonable people will disagree. Daniel set down the marker. The goal isn't consensus. It's rigor. Making sure you've considered alternatives and can defend your choices. After the training session, Catherine pulled Daniel aside in the hallway. You're a natural at this. The new analysts already look at you like you're some kind of analytics guru. I just remember what it felt like to be thrown into deep water without a life jacket. Well, they're lucky to have you. Catherine checked her phone. Speaking of which, Victoria Hyperion's team just confirmed for the second quarterly review next Wednesday. Are you ready? Daniel thought about the comprehensive analytics package he'd been building for the past month. User growth patterns, engagement trends, the results from the win-back campaign they'd implemented based on his recommendations. I'm ready. Good. Because she's bringing her entire executive team this time. Apparently word got out about your analytics, and everyone wants to see them firsthand. The pressure should have felt crushing, but Daniel had learned something over the past 3 months. Pressure was just information about what mattered, and what mattered was delivering insights that helped Hyperion make better decisions. That evening, he picked up Sophie from aftercare and found her bursting with excitement about something that had happened at school. She talked non-stop during the bus ride home about a science project her class was starting, something involving plants and different types of soil. And we each get to design our own experiment, Sophie explained, her eyes bright. Maya and I are partnering up, and we want to test if music helps plants grow faster. Do you think it does, Daddy? I think that's exactly the kind of question science is designed to answer, Daniel said. You'll form a hypothesis, design an experiment to test it, and let the data tell you what's true. That's what you do at work, right? Look at data to find out what's true. The comparison made him smile. Pretty much exactly that. So we're both scientists. I guess we are. At home, Sophie insisted on starting her project planning immediately, spreading notebook paper across the kitchen table and sketching out experiment designs with the intense focus she inherited from him. Daniel made dinner while she worked, occasionally offering suggestions about control groups and variables. His phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan. Meridian presentation went perfectly. Client loved the hybrid forecasting model. They're expanding the contract. Marcus is giving us both credit. Drinks Wednesday to celebrate? Daniel typed back. Can't Wednesday. Hyperion review. Thursday? Thursday works. Nice problem to have. Multiple client wins to celebrate. The easy camaraderie in Jonathan's message would have seemed impossible 2 months ago, but the collaborative project on Meridian had transformed their relationship from hostile competition to genuine partnership. Jonathan had even started seeking Daniel's input on other projects, and Daniel had learned to appreciate Jonathan's sophisticated understanding of retail analytics. Professional relationships, Daniel was discovering, could evolve just as dramatically as personal circumstances. Saturday morning brought something Daniel had been simultaneously anticipating and dreading, his first class for completing his bachelor's degree. Advanced Business Analytics. Saturday mornings from 9 to noon via video conference. He set up his laptop at the kitchen table while Sophie watched cartoons in the living room, feeling absurdly nervous for someone who'd been doing professional analytics for months. The professor, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, opened the session with a case study about a company that had made catastrophic strategic decisions based on flawed data analysis. As she walked through the errors, Daniel found himself mentally cataloging the mistakes, recognizing the same fundamental problems he'd corrected in the Hyperion model. When Dr. Mitchell asked for analysis, Daniel unmuted his microphone. The core issue is they were measuring outputs instead of outcomes. They tracked how many users completed the registration flow, but they never validated whether those users actually engaged with the product. High registration numbers looked like success, but they were measuring the wrong thing. Exactly right, Dr. Mitchell said. And Mr. Hayes, you're speaking from professional experience, I assume? Yes, ma'am. I work in analytics consulting. Then you'll find this course builds theoretical frameworks around practices you may already be using intuitively. The value is in understanding the why behind the what. The class continued for 3 hours, and Daniel found himself energized rather than exhausted by it. The theoretical concepts gave structure to approaches he'd developed through trial and error, and the academic rigor scratched an intellectual itch he hadn't realized he still had. During the break, another student, a woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Jennifer, messaged him privately through the video platform. That was a great point about outputs versus outcomes. Are you working while finishing your degree? Yeah, senior analyst at a consulting firm. You? Operations manager at a hospital, trying to move into healthcare analytics. Your insights are really helpful. The conversation continued after class ended, and by the time Daniel logged off, he'd exchanged contact information with 3 other working professionals in the program. A study group was forming, people who understood the challenge of balancing career demands with academic requirements. Sophie appeared beside him as he closed his laptop. Was school hard? Not hard, just different from what I do at work. Good different. I'm glad you're going back to school, Daddy. Now we're both learning new things. The simple observation carried unexpected weight. They were both building toward futures that had seemed impossible not long ago. Sunday afternoon, Daniel's mother called. Her voice came through the phone bright with excitement he rarely heard. I got your money, sweetheart. You didn't need to send so much. I wanted to. Things are stable now, Mom. Really stable. Your father would be so proud of you. Her voice caught slightly. Daniel's father had died when he was 19, long before Sophie was born, but his memory still shaped everything. He always said you had something special, that you'd figure it out eventually. It took a while. The important things usually do. She paused. How's my granddaughter? Growing up too fast, she's doing a science project about whether music helps plants grow. His mother laughed. That girl has your curiosity. Make sure you're taking pictures, Daniel. These years go by so quick. After the call ended, Daniel found Sophie in her room, arranging small pots of soil she'd convinced him to buy at the garden store. She'd labeled them carefully: control group, classical music, rock music, pop music. A small Bluetooth speaker sat ready to provide the experimental variable. When do you start the experiment? Daniel asked from the doorway. Tomorrow. We plant the seeds and then start the music schedules. Sophie looked up at him seriously. I'm going to keep really good data, like you do at work. Maya is making the charts. That's excellent scientific methodology. I know. She returned her attention to the pots, then added without looking up. I'm really happy, Daddy. Are you happy? The question was becoming a refrain, as though she needed regular confirmation that their new stability was real and lasting. Yeah, baby, I'm very happy. Good, Sophie smiled. Me too. Monday morning brought unexpected news. Marcus called Daniel into his office before the regular team meeting, and Catherine was already there, looking pleased about something. Close the door, Marcus said. I want to talk to you about something before it becomes official. Daniel sat, his mind racing through possibilities. Victoria Hyperion called me Friday afternoon, Marcus continued. She's so impressed with your work that she wants to bring you in as a consultant for their internal analytics team. Not replacing our contract, she still wants Sterling managing the strategic analytics. But she wants you to spend 1 day a week embedded with their team, helping them build better internal capabilities. Daniel processed that. That's unusual, isn't it? Extremely unusual, Catherine confirmed. Clients don't typically want to pay for capability building that might eventually reduce their dependence on us. But Victoria sees it as a long-term investment. She'd rather have an internal team that thinks like you than save the consulting fees. It would mean you're working 4 days a week at Sterling, 1 day at Hyperion, Marcus explained. We'd structure it as a secondment arrangement. You'd still be our employee, but Hyperion would pay a premium consulting rate for your dedicated time. Financially, it's excellent for the firm and for you. We're proposing a $30,000 annual raise to reflect the additional responsibility. $30,000. On top of the $140,000 he was already making. Daniel's brain stuttered, trying to comprehend the numbers. What do you think? Marcus asked. I think I'd be crazy to say no. Good answer, Marcus smiled. We'll finalize the contract details this week. You'd start the Hyperion embedded days in 2 weeks. Catherine will work with you on transitioning some of your Sterling project load to free up that time. After the meeting, Daniel walked back to his desk in a daze. Rachel was waiting there, grinning like she already knew. Catherine told me, she said. This is huge, Daniel. Embedded consulting with a major client? That's the kind of assignment that typically goes to senior partners. I've been here 3 months. And you've accomplished more than most people do in 3 years. Rachel's expression turned more serious. You know what this means, right? You're not just a talented analyst anymore. You're becoming a strategic asset, the kind of person clients specifically request and competitors try to poach. The implications were both thrilling and slightly terrifying. Daniel had spent so long focused on basic survival that the concept of being valuable enough for competitors to poach felt absurd. But Rachel wasn't given to exaggeration, and neither was Marcus. Wednesday's Hyperion Quarterly Review was the largest presentation Daniel had delivered yet. Victoria's entire executive team filled the Sterling conference room, 12 people whose collective decisions shaped a company worth hundreds of millions. David Park was there, along with Michelle Torres and several VPs Daniel hadn't met before. The presentation covered 3 months of results from implementing Daniel's strategic recommendations. The win-back campaign had reactivated 47,000 users, slightly exceeding projections. The at-risk intervention program had reduced churn by 18% in its first 60 days. User engagement scores were trending upward across all key segments. But more important than the numbers was what they meant. Daniel had learned that executives didn't just want data. They wanted stories that data told about their business. What we're seeing is a fundamental shift in how users perceive Hyperion's platform, Daniel explained, showing engagement pattern visualizations. 3 months ago, you had high registration rates but poor conversion to active use. Now, registration is slightly lower because you've tightened the qualification funnel based on our recommendations, but conversion to sustained engagement is up 43%. You're getting fewer users, but they're the right users. One of the VPs, a man named Thomas who ran product development, leaned forward. The feature gap analysis you provided influenced our entire product roadmap. We've prioritized the mobile app performance improvements you identified, and early beta testing shows significant impact. Users who struggled with the old mobile experience are now engaging 3 times more frequently. That's exactly what the data predicted, Daniel said. Mobile engagement was the biggest differentiator between users who stayed and users who churned. Fixing that friction point addresses one of your largest opportunity areas. Victoria had been quiet through most of the presentation, but now she spoke. Mr. Hayes, I want to be clear about something. The analytics you've provided over the past 3 months haven't just improved our retention numbers. They've changed how we think about our business. My executive team now asks different questions, looks at problems differently, makes decisions based on user behavior rather than assumptions. That cultural shift is worth more than the direct financial impact. She turned to Marcus. Which brings me to the embedded consulting proposal we discussed. I'd like to formalize that arrangement starting in 2 weeks. Daniel would work with our internal analytics director, help train our team, and provide strategic guidance on the frameworks they're building. 1 day per week initially, with potential to expand if it's working well. Marcus nodded. We've drafted the contract terms. Catherine can walk through them with your team this afternoon. After the Hyperion team departed, the Sterling conference room felt electric with success. This wasn't just retaining a client, this was deepening a relationship into something more strategic and valuable. Catherine pulled Daniel aside as the others filtered out. You just became the first analyst in Sterling's history to have a dedicated embedded consulting arrangement. That's not a small thing. I'm starting to realize that. Good, because Marcus is going to want to replicate this model with other clients, which means you're going to be training other analysts on how to build these kinds of strategic relationships. Catherine paused. How would you feel about a formal leadership title? Analytics team lead or something similar? The trajectory was accelerating faster than Daniel had prepared for. 3 months from new hire to team lead seemed impossible. I don't know if I'm ready for that, he admitted. You're already doing the work. The title just makes it official. Catherine's expression softened. I know it's fast, but Daniel, opportunity doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It shows up, and you either grab it or watch it go to someone else. That evening, Daniel sat with Sophie at the kitchen table while she recorded data in her science experiment notebook. The plants were just starting to sprout, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil in each pot. The classical music pot has 3 sprouts, Sophie reported seriously. The rock music has 2, pop music has 3, control group has 2. Interesting. Too early to draw conclusions, though. I know, Mrs. Patterson says we need at least 2 weeks of data before we can analyze patterns. Sophie looked up at him. Daddy, what does embedded consulting mean? Where did you hear that term? I heard you talking to Mrs. Chen about it when she picked me up yesterday. Daniel smiled. His daughter had inherited more than his curiosity. She'd inherited his habit of absorbing information from conversations she wasn't supposed to be listening to. It means I'm going to spend 1 day each week working at a client's office instead of at Sterling, he explained, helping their team learn to do analytics better. So you're like a teacher? Sort of. More like a coach, teaching them skills while they work on real projects. Sophie considered that. Will you still pick me up on Fridays? Every single Friday. That's not changing. Good. She returned to her plants, satisfied. The following week blurred past in a cascade of meetings, training sessions, and preparation for the Hyperion embedded work. Daniel met with their internal analytics director, a sharp woman named Rebecca Lynn, who'd been with Hyperion for 5 years and had strong opinions about what her team needed. Our analysts are technically competent, Rebecca explained during their preliminary meeting, but they think too small. They answer the questions they're asked instead of questioning whether we're asking the right questions in the first place. That's what I want you to teach them. That's more about analytical thinking than technical skills. Exactly. I can train technical skills. I need you to show them how to think strategically. Daniel's first embedded day at Hyperion was surreal. He arrived at their downtown headquarters, a gleaming tower that made Sterling's office look modest, and was issued a temporary security badge with consultant printed beneath his name. Rebecca introduced him to her team of 6 analysts, all of whom looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The youngest, a recent graduate named Chris, clearly resented the arrangement. No offense, but we've been doing analytics here for years. What's a consultant going to teach us that we don't already know? Daniel recognized the defensive pride. He'd felt it himself when Jonathan had initially dismissed him. Maybe nothing, Daniel said honestly. Or maybe I'll show you some approaches that work in other contexts. Either way, I'm here to collaborate, not dictate. Let's start by looking at what you're currently working on. Chris pulled up a customer segmentation analysis he'd been building for the marketing team. Daniel studied it for a few minutes, then asked a simple question. What decision will marketing make differently based on this segmentation? Chris blinked. What do you mean? If marketing already knows they have different customer types, what does your analysis tell them to do differently? What action does this enable? Well, they'll understand their customers better. Okay, but understanding for its own sake isn't the goal. Analytics serves decisions. Daniel pulled up a whiteboard. Before you build any analysis, ask yourself, what specific decision needs to be made? Who's making it? What information do they need to make it well? Then build exactly that. Nothing more and nothing less. He watched understanding dawn on Chris's face, the same shift he'd seen in the new analysts at Sterling when a concept clicked into place. By the end of the day, Daniel had worked through similar exercises with the entire team, helping them reframe their projects around decision-making rather than just data exploration. Rebecca pulled him aside as he was packing up. That was exactly what they needed, she said. You didn't show them new technical tricks. You showed them how to think differently about why analytics matters. That's the hard part to teach, which is why we're paying a premium for you to do it. Rebecca smiled. Same time next week? The rhythm of Daniel's new life settled into place over the following weeks. 4 days at Sterling, managing his project portfolio and mentoring the growing analytics team. 1 day at Hyperion, coaching their internal analysts and building their strategic capabilities. Evenings with Sophie, helping with homework and watching her science experiment progress. Saturday mornings in class, building theoretical frameworks around his practical experience. It was demanding, but it was the kind of demanding that felt purposeful rather than desperate. Sophie's science project concluded with results that delighted her. The classical music plants had grown fastest, followed by pop music, then the control group, with rock music trailing slightly behind. She and Maya presented their findings to the class with charts and carefully recorded observations, and Mrs. Patterson gave them the highest marks. I'm going to be a scientist when I grow up, Sophie announced at dinner that evening. Like you, but with plants instead of computers. That sounds perfect, Daniel said. The world needs more scientists. And we'll both have degrees from good schools. The casual confidence in her voice, that of course they'd both have degrees, of course they'd both pursue their interests, of course their futures were full of possibility, made Daniel's chest tight with gratitude for how far they'd come. Spring arrived with the kind of weather that made the city feel new. Daniel had been at Sterling for 6 months, and the company newsletter announced his promotion to analytics team lead with a small photo and a paragraph about his contributions to the firm's growth. His mother called crying happy tears when she saw it online. The team he now led had grown to 12 analysts, including Amy Chen, who'd proven to be exactly as talented as her interview suggested. Daniel had developed a mentorship framework that paired experienced analysts with new hires, creating knowledge transfer that strengthened the entire department. Jonathan had become a genuine friend, someone Daniel grabbed lunch with regularly and strategized with on complex projects. Rachel had been promoted to senior analytics manager, a role that made her Daniel's peer in the organizational hierarchy. Catherine and Marcus treated him as part of the leadership team, including him in strategic planning discussions that shaped the firm's direction. And through it all, Daniel never forgot the man who'd walked into an interview 6 months ago with a worn suit and a desperate hope that someone might give him a chance. He kept that resume in his desk drawer as a reminder, not of where he'd been, but of how far determination could carry someone when opportunity finally aligned with capability. On a Friday evening in late spring, Daniel picked up Sophie from school and found her carrying a certificate. Student of the Month for Excellence in Science. Her teacher had written a note on the back. Sophie's curiosity and dedication to learning remind me why I became a teacher. She's going to do great things. They celebrated with ice cream at the fancy place, and Sophie talked excitedly about next year when she'd be in 3rd grade and could join the science club. Do you think we can afford the club fees? She asked. And Daniel heard the old anxiety in her voice, the caution learned from years of scarcity. We can afford it, he said firmly. Whatever you want to do, whatever helps you learn and grow, we can afford it now. That's not something you need to worry about anymore. Sophie studied his face like she was checking whether he meant it, then nodded slowly. Okay, I'm going to join science club and maybe art club too. Maya says art club is really fun. Then you should do both. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a glass of wine, a nice bottle, not the cheap stuff, and looked at the acceptance letter from Northwestern that had arrived that afternoon. His re-enrollment had been approved. By next spring, he'd complete his bachelor's degree, 7 years after he'd put it on hold. His phone buzzed with an email from Marcus. Quarterly performance review scheduled for Monday. Expect significant salary adjustment to reflect expanded responsibilities and client impact. Daniel closed his laptop and walked to Sophie's room, standing in the familiar doorway and watching her sleep. But this time, there was no crushing weight of financial terror, no desperate calculations about making rent, no fear about what tomorrow might bring. There was just gratitude and possibility, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that competence had finally been recognized, that effort had finally paid off, that the future they'd been fighting for was finally undeniably real. 1 year after walking into that interview with nothing but desperation and a worn suit, Daniel stood in front of Sterling Analytics' full leadership team presenting the annual Analytics Department Performance Review. The conference room was packed with senior partners, department heads, and several board members who'd flown in specifically for this presentation. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as Daniel walked through the metrics that told the story of the department's transformation. Revenue from analytics clients up 47% year over year, client retention at 96%, the highest in the firm's history. Team size grown from 15 to 23 analysts, with a hiring pipeline that would add 8 more by year's end. But the numbers Daniel was most proud of weren't about revenue. They were about people. We've implemented a mentorship program that pairs every new analyst with an experienced team member, Daniel explained, showing the retention and performance data. Our first-year analyst retention is now 100% compared to 68% firm-wide average across other departments. More importantly, our analysts are reaching senior-level competency 30% faster than the industry benchmark. Catherine, who'd been promoted to Chief Analytics Officer 3 months earlier, smiled from her seat beside Marcus. She'd been instrumental in supporting Daniel's vision for building not just a profitable department, but a place where talented people could grow. One of the board members, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, raised her hand. Mr. Hayes, these results are impressive, but I'm curious about scalability. Can you maintain this quality as you continue growing? It was exactly the question Daniel had anticipated. We've built systems specifically designed to scale. The quality assurance protocol ensures consistency regardless of team size. The mentorship framework creates knowledge transfer that compounds as the team grows. And we've developed clear career progression paths that retain top talent while creating leadership pipeline for future growth. He clicked to the next slide, showing the organizational structure he'd designed. We're not just building a team, we're building an organization that can sustain excellence independent of any single person. After the presentation, Marcus pulled Daniel aside while the board members filtered out to their next meeting. That was exactly what they needed to see. The board has been concerned about our analytics growth, whether we're building something sustainable or just riding momentum that could collapse. And what do they think now? They think we should expand your role. Marcus's expression was serious. The board wants to create a new position, Director of Analytics Strategy. You'd oversee not just the internal team, but our entire analytics service line across all client relationships. Team leadership, methodology development, client strategy, everything. Daniel absorbed that. Director level. A year ago, he'd been unemployed and desperate. Now they were offering him a director position. The compensation would reflect the responsibility, Marcus continued. Base salary of $220,000, plus profit sharing based on analytics division performance. Equity stake in the firm. Full executive benefits package. The number was almost incomprehensible. Daniel thought about the man who'd counted pennies for his daughter's field trip, who'd stretched grocery budgets until they screamed, who'd lain awake terrified about making rent. When would this start? Daniel asked. July 1st. That gives you 2 months to transition current responsibilities and prepare for the expanded role. Catherine would work closely with you. She wants analytics to be Sterling's flagship service, and she believes you're the person to make that happen. Daniel looked out the conference room windows at the city sprawling below, the same view he'd had from his desk for the past year. Somewhere out there were other people fighting the battles he'd fought. Unfinished degrees, single-parent struggles, doors that wouldn't open despite talent and determination. I'll do it, he said. On one condition. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What's that? I want to create a program for candidates who don't fit the traditional mold. People with incomplete degrees, non-linear career paths, circumstances that force them to take unconventional routes. I want Sterling to actively recruit talent that other firms overlook. That's already part of your role. You've hired 3 people in the past 6 months who wouldn't have gotten interviews anywhere else. I want to formalize it, make it part of our identity, because there are a lot of talented people out there who just need someone to give them a chance. Marcus studied him for a long moment. You're thinking about the man who walked into an interview a year ago. I'm thinking about all the people who are that man right now, who have the capability but not the credentials. Who would excel if someone looked past their resume? Then make it happen. As director, you'll have the authority to shape our recruiting strategy however you see fit. Marcus extended his hand. Congratulations, Daniel. You've earned this. That evening, Daniel picked up Sophie from aftercare. She was 8 now, taller and more confident, thriving in ways that still made his chest tight with gratitude. She spotted him at the door and ran over with her backpack bouncing. Guess what, Daddy? I got picked for the advanced science program next year. That's amazing, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. And Maya got picked too, so we can be partners on all the projects. Sophie grabbed his hand as they walked to the bus stop. Mrs. Patterson says the advanced program goes on field trips to real science labs and everything. Daniel thought about the field trip permission slip from a year ago, the $45 that had seemed impossible. Now Sophie was heading into advanced programs with opportunities he'd barely dreamed of for her. We should celebrate, he said. How about that new Italian restaurant you've been wanting to try? The fancy one with the real pizza oven? That's the one. Sophie's face lit up. Can we invite Grandma? She's never been to a fancy restaurant. The suggestion surprised him, but it shouldn't have. Sophie had always been generous with whatever happiness she had. That's a great idea. Let's call her when we get home. His mother arrived by train the next evening, and Daniel picked her up at the station. She looked older than he remembered from her last visit 6 months ago, but her eyes were bright with excitement when she saw him waiting. Look at you, she said, hugging him tight. My successful son in his fancy suit. It's just a work suit, Mom. It's a suit that says you've made something of yourself. She pulled back to look at him properly. Your father would be so proud, Daniel. I wish he could see this. They collected Sophie from aftercare together, and his mother's delight at seeing her granddaughter made Daniel realize how much he'd been neglecting family in the chaos of building his career. He'd been sending money regularly, calling on weekends, but actual visits had been rare. That needed to change. Dinner at the Italian restaurant was everything Sophie had hoped for. She ordered pizza margherita and declared it the best thing she'd ever eaten. Daniel's mother tried every dish, savoring each bite with the appreciation of someone who'd spent decades making meals stretch further than they should. Tell me about your new job, his mother said to Daniel over tiramisu. Sophie says you're going to be a director now. Starting in July, director of analytics strategy. I don't know what that means, but it sounds important. It means he's going to help lots of people learn to be good at analytics, Sophie explained with the confident authority of a child who'd absorbed more of her father's work than he'd realized. And he's going to hire people who are really smart but didn't finish college, like he didn't finish at first. His mother's eyes went bright with tears. You're finishing your degree too, aren't you? You told me you'd re-enrolled. I graduate in 3 weeks, Daniel said. Bachelor of Science in Business Analytics from Northwestern. 7 years later than planned, but I'm finishing. I'm coming to your graduation. Mom, you don't have to. I'm coming. Her voice was firm. I was there when you started college, and I'm going to be there when you finish it. You don't get to deny me that. Sophie bounced in her seat. Can I come too? I've never been to a graduation. Daniel looked at the two most important people in his life and felt something settle into place that had been unsteady for years. This was what success actually meant, not the salary or the title or the corner office. This. Family gathered around a table, celebrating achievements that had seemed impossible not long ago. Of course you can both come, he said. I wouldn't want it any other way. The weeks leading up to graduation were a controlled chaos of finishing his final class projects while managing the transition to his new role at Sterling. Daniel worked with Catherine to document his current responsibilities, identify which ones could be delegated to Amy Chen, who'd been promoted to senior analyst and was ready for expanded leadership opportunities, and plan the strategic initiatives he'd take on as director. He also began implementing the recruiting program for non-traditional candidates. Working with Sterling's HR department, he developed interview protocols that focused on demonstrated capability rather than credentials, created partnerships with community colleges and workforce development programs, and established a fellowship program that would bring in talented people who needed experience more than they needed traditional pedigrees. The first fellow was a 34-year-old woman named Maria Santos, who'd been working retail management while teaching herself data science through online courses. She had no degree and no formal analytics experience, but her portfolio showed sophisticated work and genuine insight. Jonathan, who'd become one of Daniel's closest colleagues, reviewed Maria's application and pulled Daniel aside. You're taking a risk with this one. No degree, no professional experience in analytics. What if she can't handle the work? Then we'll train her until she can, Daniel said, just like someone took a risk on me. Jonathan smiled slightly. Fair enough, but I'm going to remind you of this conversation if it blows up. Deal. Maria started the following Monday, and Daniel assigned Amy Chen as her mentor. Within 2 weeks, Maria had proven herself more than capable, bringing fresh perspectives precisely because she hadn't been trained to think like everyone else. The graduation ceremony took place on a perfect May morning, with sunshine streaming through the trees on Northwestern's campus. Daniel sat among the business school graduates, wearing the cap and gown he'd thought he'd never get to wear, and watched the dean work through the alphabetical list of names. When they called Daniel Christopher Hayes, he walked across the stage to accept the diploma he'd started working toward 12 years earlier. His mother and Sophie stood in the audience, cheering loud enough to embarrass him, and he didn't care at all. After the ceremony, they took photos on the campus quad. Sophie insisted on wearing his cap and holding his diploma, declaring she was practicing for when she graduated from college herself. His mother stood beside them, looking happier than Daniel had seen her in years. Professor Martinez found them during the reception, navigating through the crowd with determination. Daniel, I was hoping to catch you before you left. Professor Martinez, this is my mother and my daughter Sophie. Wonderful to meet you both. Sophie, your father was one of the most talented students I've ever taught. I'm so glad he came back to finish what he started. He's talented at his job too, Sophie said proudly. He just got promoted to director. I heard about that. Sterling Analytics is lucky to have him. Professor Martinez turned to Daniel. I wanted to tell you something. I've been teaching for 27 years, and I've seen thousands of students come through my program. Most of them do fine. They get their degrees, they get decent jobs, they have perfectly good careers. He paused, his expression serious. But every few years I get a student who has something special, not just intelligence, but insight. The ability to see patterns others miss, to ask questions others don't think to ask. You had that quality when you were 19, and from what I can see, you've only sharpened it through experience. Thank you, Professor. That means a lot. I'm not finished. Professor Martinez smiled. I know you've had a challenging path, dropping out to raise your daughter, struggling for years, feeling like you'd failed somehow. But Daniel, the man who graduated today is infinitely more valuable than the 19-year-old who started this program would have been. The struggles made you better. They gave you perspective and determination that no classroom could teach. The words hit deeper than Daniel expected. He'd spent so many years viewing his interrupted education as a failure, a deficit he could never quite overcome. But Professor Martinez was reframing it as something else, experience that added value rather than subtracting it. Thank you, Daniel said quietly. I needed to hear that. After Professor Martinez left, Daniel's mother hugged him again. He's right, you know. Everything you went through made you who you are. And who you are is pretty remarkable. That evening, after his mother had caught her train home and Sophie was asleep, Daniel sat in his living room with the diploma in his hands. Bachelor of Science in Business Analytics. The paper itself was just paper, but what it represented was transformation. From the desperate single father who couldn't afford his daughter's field trip to the man who'd built a career on competence and determination. His phone buzzed with a message from Victoria Hyperion. Heard about your promotion to director. Well deserved. Looking forward to continuing our partnership. Your embedded work with Rebecca's team has been transformative. Then one from Catherine. Congratulations on graduation. See you Monday to start planning the next chapter. And finally, one from Rachel. The team got together and bought you a graduation gift. Amy's organizing a surprise celebration Monday afternoon. Act surprised when it happens. Daniel smiled, setting the phone aside. A year ago, he'd been alone in every way that mattered. Now he had colleagues who'd become friends, clients who valued his work, a career trajectory that seemed limitless. But more important than any of that, he had Sophie sleeping safely in her room, his mother proud of him for the first time in years, and a future that held possibilities instead of just survival. Monday morning, Daniel arrived at Sterling Analytics as Director of Analytics Strategy. His office had been relocated to the executive floor, with windows overlooking the financial district and enough space for the strategy sessions and team meetings that would now define his work. Amy knocked on his door mid-morning. Got a minute? Always. She came in carrying a folder. I wanted to show you something. Maria, the fellowship candidate you hired, built this analysis of our internal project workflow efficiency. She identified 3 bottlenecks in our review process that are adding an average of 2.3 days to project timelines. Daniel reviewed Maria's work, impressed by both the insight and the presentation. This is excellent. Have you shown this to Catherine? Not yet. I wanted to run it by you first since you're the one who hired her. Amy, you're her mentor and a senior analyst. You don't need my approval to recognize good work. Daniel handed back the folder. Take this to Catherine yourself, and tell Maria she should present it at Friday's team meeting. This is exactly the kind of operational insight we need. After Amy left, Daniel spent the afternoon in strategic planning sessions with Catherine and Marcus, mapping out the analytics division's growth over the next 3 years. They talked about new service offerings, geographic expansion, potential acquisitions of smaller analytics firms to rapidly scale capabilities. It was heady stuff, the kind of strategic decision-making that shaped companies rather than just serving them. At 3 p.m., Daniel excused himself and left for Sophie's school. The Friday pickups had become sacred time, a promise he'd made when everything else was uncertain, and that he maintained now that certainty was established. Sophie ran to him at the gate, backpack bouncing as always. How does it feel to be a college graduate and a director in the same week? Like I might wake up and find out it was all a dream. It's not a dream, Daddy. You earned it. She grabbed his hand. Can we go to the park? It's such a nice day. They went to the park, the same one where they'd flown a kite a year ago when fresh vegetables had seemed like an extravagance. Sophie ran straight for the swings, and Daniel pushed her the way he had countless times before, listening to her talk about her day and her friends and her excitement about the advanced science program starting in the fall. Daddy, Sophie said as the swing arced down, do you remember when we used to worry about money all the time? I remember. I'm glad we don't have to worry anymore. It's nicer this way. It's much nicer this way. But I also want you to know something. Sophie turned to look at him as he pushed her again. Even when we were worried about money, I was still happy because I had you. The simple statement carried weight that made Daniel's eyes burn. All those years of struggling, all those nights of lying awake terrified about making rent, all the times he'd felt like he was failing her by not being able to provide everything she needed. And she'd been happy anyway because they had each other. I love you, sweetheart, he said, his voice rough. I love you too, Daddy. Higher. He pushed her higher, watching her hair stream behind her in the golden afternoon light, and thought about everything that had changed and everything that had stayed the same. The circumstances had transformed, but what mattered most, this relationship, this love, this commitment to building a good life together, had been there all along. Later that evening, after Sophie was asleep, Daniel stood at his apartment window looking out at the city. He'd been thinking about moving to a bigger place, somewhere with more space and better schools in the neighborhood, but something kept stopping him. This apartment had been home through the hardest years. It held memories of struggles overcome and determination rewarded. Maybe they'd move eventually. But not yet. Not until they were ready to leave behind what this place represented. His phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Daniel, sorry to call so late. I just got off the phone with the CEO of Titanium Industries. They're looking for a complete analytics transformation. Everything from customer insights to operational efficiency to predictive modeling. It's a $20 million contract over 3 years, the biggest analytics deal in Sterling's history. That's incredible. They specifically requested you as the lead strategist. Said they'd heard about your work with Hyperion and want that same caliber of thinking applied to their business. Marcus paused. This is the kind of contract that defines a firm's trajectory. If we land this and execute well, we'll be competing with McKinsey and Bain for enterprise analytics work. When's the proposal due? We're presenting to their board in 6 weeks. I want you to lead the pitch team, design the engagement model, and oversee implementation if we win the contract. This is your project, Daniel. Everything you've built over the past year has been leading to an opportunity like this. After the call ended, Daniel sat in the quiet apartment and let himself feel the full weight of how far he'd come. From rejected candidate to director leading a $20 million proposal in 14 months. It was the kind of trajectory that seemed fictional when you were living paycheck to paycheck and counting pennies. But it had happened. Through determination, talent, and the willingness to seize opportunity when it finally appeared. The next 6 weeks were intense. Daniel assembled a team of Sterling's best analysts, including Jonathan, Rachel, and Amy, to design the Titanium Industries proposal. They worked long hours building frameworks, validating methodologies, and creating presentations that would convince a skeptical board that Sterling could deliver on massive promises. Sophie adapted to the demanding schedule with grace, understanding in the way children sometimes do that this work mattered. Mrs. Chen helped with pickups on the days Daniel couldn't make it, and Sophie's friend Maya's mother began coordinating playdates that gave Daniel needed flexibility. The morning of the Titanium presentation, Daniel woke to find Sophie had left a note on the coffee maker. Good luck today, Daddy. You're going to be amazing. Love, Sophie. He carried that note in his pocket during the presentation, a reminder of why all of this mattered. The Titanium board was exactly as demanding as expected. They challenged every assumption, questioned every methodology, and pushed back on timelines and deliverables. But Daniel and his team had anticipated the objections, prepared comprehensive answers, and demonstrated depth of thinking that went beyond standard consulting approaches. 4 hours after the presentation began, Titanium's CEO stood and extended his hand to Daniel. We've seen 6 proposals for this work. Yours is the only one that convinced me you actually understand our business. Sterling Analytics has the contract. The celebration back at Sterling's office was jubilant. Catherine opened champagne. Marcus gave a speech about the firm's evolution and Daniel's central role in making it happen. The analytics team cheered with the genuine excitement of people who'd contributed to something significant. But the moment Daniel treasured most came later, when he picked up Sophie from school and told her about winning the contract. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," she said, hugging him tight. "You worked really hard for this." "We worked really hard for this," he corrected. "None of it would have been possible without you, sweetheart. You're the reason I kept fighting when things were hard." "Then we make a good team. The best team." That evening, Daniel sat at his kitchen table and wrote an email he'd been composing in his head for weeks. It went to Professor Martinez, to Catherine, to Marcus, to everyone who'd taken a chance on him when his resume said they shouldn't. The email was simple. "Thank you for seeing what I could do instead of what I lacked. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself. Thank you for believing that competence mattered more than credentials." And then he wrote one more message, this one to himself, saved in a document he titled "Remember This." It read, "You walked into an interview desperate and underestimated. You saw a problem no one else noticed and refused to walk away. You built something valuable from determination and insight. You proved that talent matters more than pedigree, that second chances can transform lives, that the right opportunity at the right moment can change everything. Never forget what it felt like to be overlooked. Never forget to look for that overlooked talent in others. Never forget that you were once the man who needed someone to take a chance." Daniel saved the document and closed his laptop. Through Sophie's bedroom door, he could hear her talking to herself while she arranged her books, chapter books now, much more advanced than a year ago, another sign of how much had changed. He walked to her doorway and watched her for a moment, this remarkable child who'd weathered uncertainty with grace and who'd never doubted that her father would find a way forward. "Hey, Daddy?" Sophie looked up. "Can we go to the park this weekend? Like we used to when we had time?" "Absolutely. Saturday morning, just you and me." "Perfect." She smiled and returned to her books, content. Daniel stood there a moment longer, feeling the weight of gratitude and accomplishment settle into his bones like bedrock. The struggles weren't erased by success. They'd shaped him, made him stronger, given him perspective that no amount of privilege could provide. But they were behind him now. The desperate scrambling, the crushing anxiety, the constant calculation of whether they could afford basic necessities, all of it was history. What lay ahead was possibility, growth, the chance to build something meaningful and help others climb the same path he'd traveled. Daniel turned off the hallway light and walked to the window, looking out at the city where he'd fought and won and built a future from nothing but determination and talent that someone had finally recognized. Somewhere out there, other people were fighting the same battle. Other single parents counting pennies, other talented people being overlooked because their resumes didn't fit the template, other desperate candidates walking into interviews hoping for any chance. He couldn't help all of them, but he could help some. Through the recruiting program he'd built, through the chances he'd give to people who reminded him of himself, through the proof his story offered that the right opportunity could transform everything. Daniel pulled out his phone and texted Marcus. "Let's expand the fellowship program. I want to bring in 5 more non-traditional candidates next quarter." The reply came quickly. "Done. Your program, your call. This is exactly why we made you director." Daniel smiled and pocketed his phone. Then he walked to Sophie's room one more time, kissed her sleeping forehead, and whispered the words that had sustained them through the hardest years. "We made it, sweetheart. We really made it." And in the morning, they'd wake up to a future filled with possibilities that had once seemed impossible. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight, there was just this. A father and daughter safe and stable and loved in an apartment that had sheltered them through struggles and now held only promises of better things to come. The interview might have been over a year ago, but the life it started was just beginning.